Welcome to episode 56 of the Coast to Coast AFL podcast with Nick and Blaze. I am Blaze, your host, and this week it was ANZAC Round, ANZAC Appeal Round, to be more specific. The traditional round where we honour the ANZACs who fought in World War One and served our countries, Australia and New Zealand to be specific, in the fight against whatever evils were laid in World War One. I can't remember, it was so long ago and I did not study that specific war. That is not the reason why we're here today. We're here to talk about the footy, starting with the Thursday night traditional ANZAC Eve game, then the two ANZAC Day games, one possibly becoming a new traditional game, going off of how phenomenal of a show it was, all the way up to the Sunday games as per normal. So without further ado, how are you doing, Mr. Sarek?
Not too bad, not too bad. I think old Archduke Franz Ferdinand will be a bit upset by you not remembering his assassination
I'd
that
rather
started off
remember
World War
Franz
One.
Ferdinand the band than Franz Ferdinand the person.
Well, that's what they were named after. But yeah, as I said, so I mean, obviously it covers all wars. It's not just World War One, but that's when we started
Yes.
acknowledging it. But yes, but apart from that, I've actually been okay. I've actually seen a few friends from, well, one friend that came up from over east for a wedding.
Yes.
Sort of only met them occasionally, but it's like, hey, around the city, got nothing else to do. You want to tag along? We did some escape rooms with another one of her friends, and yeah, so I mainly just caught up a couple of times there. Yeah, I was out a bit this weekend, nothing too busy, but yeah. Also, undefeated in those two escape rooms. We got out both
Very
times.
nice, very nice.
One of them was a bit jaggy, but the only two times I've done an escape room and I'm undefeated. So, yeah, if you don't require my services deconstructing football, you can hire me for your escape room needs. Just contact us on the Coast to Coast podcast for my availability.
My
yours?
win record in escape rooms is nil. I have done only one, and we did not complete it. So don't ask me for any help. My weekend was pretty busy, as you can hear. I'm much better than what I was last week. It was a cold. It stumped me for a bit. I had to leave work early on Thursday and just get a good nap in and drown myself in medication just so I could make it to the ANZAC Eve game, of which I went to. It was a good event as per normal. Sucks we didn't see the win, but you know how it is. Melbourne's starting to finally look good right when we want the wins more than they do. um, Otherwise, I saw both of the ANZAC Day games. Not in person, I just obviously because I wasn't in Perth for the Freo one. But we know we have a friend that was there, being friend of the podcast, Snap. He said it was a great time. Saw photos. It looked like a great time. And then yeah, my weekend was pretty busy. I went out on Saturday night for a friend's birthday dinner. And I went out Sunday. Caught up with that same friend and some other friends for Pokemon Go Community Day, and we just hung out in the city. I also went to see Star Wars Revenge of the Sith 20th anniversary re-release with my brother, which was cool. It's always a great time when Star Wars is in cinemas. It feels like the world is whole again.
Yeah, I'm gonna say Revenge of the Sith. That's the fifth one.
That's the third one in the prequels. So if you're thinking about it, a little bit off topic for the podcast, but if you if you go in release order, it's 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. So in that case, it would be the sixth one. But if you go just in episode number order, it's the third one in episode.
I just found the fifth one release, but yeah, one of the prequels.
Yeah, it's a complicated release schedule, but that's how George Lucas wanted it. But yeah, no, that was a great time. And yeah, so I caught up on all the footy. I didn't actually see much of the Saturday and Sunday games, but I watched the highlights, watched a bit of the replays, and did all our note taking and all our work, and I'm ready to jump into it.
Yeah, awesome. So you want to start on the opening, the traditional ANZAC Eve clash. Now, I think it's been, 4 or 5 years it's been going on?
It has, but actually, I want to touch on one more thing first, being couple of weeks ago, because of the way the rounds
Oh, right. Yeah.
specifically, gather round and Easter round, were kind of just stretched out. We didn't get to touch on Rising Stars for those 2 weeks, so I want to touch on those first. Being that hopefully my thing will actually work. Why are you not working? Give me 1 second. Why are you not working? That one. There we go. Okay, it's working. So as you can see, or for audio listeners, but actually, this is for round 6. Let me get to round 5. There we go. That's round 5. Archie Roberts was the Rising Star nominee for round 5 in Gather Round, where they beat Melbourne.
That's Essendon.
He's averaging 21.8 disposals, 5.2 marks, 3.5 tackles across 8 games so far. And I think he put in. I can't find the stats in this game. I probably should have found them before we started, but apparently he had a really good game, worthy of the nomination. So congrats to him.
I can probably just get that quickly for you.
Yeah, go for it.
West Coast versus Essendon. That was that one, wasn't it?
No, Essendon, Melbourne.
Essendon, Melbourne. Number 4. Okay. Archie Roberts in that game, he had 28 disposals at 86% efficiency, 391 meters gained, 6 contested possessions, 3 inside 50, 6 ground ball gets, 8 marks, 2 intercept marks from those 8, a goal assist and 2 score involvements, 6 tackles and 12 pressure acts.
That's pretty solid of a performance for such a young player.
Yeah, it's sort of like that. I'm pretty sure he's like that mix of inside and outside sort of midfielder. Yeah, goes up forward occasionally. So pretty good stats for not a pure inside mid.
Yeah, absolutely. And then for round 6, as we saw just before, Murphy Reed, the one of the many Reeds in the AFL, is the rising star for Fremantle for round 6 against who were they playing? Melbourne.
Melbourne.
Funnily enough.
Yeah, so actually kicked a goal in that game. I think this was like a sort of a build-up one. He had 17 disposals, 70% efficiency and 418 meters gained, 6 inside 50s, 5 contested possessions, 3 marks, 4 shots for 1 goal, 2.
Not bad.
2 goal assists and 8 score involvements, 2 tackles, 12 pressure acts.
Pretty solid
If
output
I read
right
that
there.
line correct. Yeah, I remember that one. Like a lot of the smalls, like Dudley and Reed, like they weren't like kicking bags or anything, but they were very heavily involved in Fremantle scoring.
Yeah, that's right.
They relied a lot on the small players in that game.
Yeah. Plus, like it was a pretty stellar game to watch, the Freo Melbourne game, so no complaints there.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of Melbourne, let's actually jump over to the round that was, being the traditional ANZAC Eve clash. I believe it has been, I think it's been like 7 or 8 years actually, because it started before the pandemic. I just can't remember how far back it goes.
I remember it was before, like 4 would have been on that year, so it's probably longer than that. So
yeah.
Anyway.
But yes, so the traditional ANZAC clash between Melbourne and Richmond.
Yeah, and Melbourne did play a very fitting tough style game. And they won the contested possession by a tick under 100, laid 30 more tackles than the Tigers, as their midfield movement were absolutely swarmed by Melbourne. Richmond had a tough time really getting any sort of ball movement and chains going. But in reality, though, it was only really 1 quarter of dominance to Melbourne. That was a 6-1 goal quarter in the third. There's a few games where it's a bit like that. It won't be the last time saying that. But in the end, Melbourne just had their uncontested game set up a bit better. And just, generated a healthy amount of intercepts to a competitive but a bit turnover-prone Richmond. Stoppages is where Richmond sort of kept themselves in the contest. But eventually, Max Gawn stood very tall, very much a captain's game, directed a lot of play in the second half. And it was only fitting that once he went off for about a 10-minute break in the last quarter, Richmond got a few junk time goals and made this game a 20-point margin. The final scores being 12-11, 83, 9-9, 63 at the MCG.
Yeah, I was when the end of that third quarter hit and Melbourne had like their 40-point lead, give or take. I was
Yeah.
I was very scared that this was going to just become a major blowout, and Melbourne decided that we were just going to be a percentage game at the end of the day. But no, I'm very
Mm,
glad that we took the advantage when we did. Tom Brown was our sub for that game, and I feel like we genuinely missed him in the first half. But he came
mm,
on towards the end of the third quarter, subbing out Campbell Gray, who was our debutant mid-season pickup from 2024, alongside Jacob Blight. I thought he played pretty well up until he was taken out. But yeah, I think we were missing Tom Brown just for a little bit of his extra pressure that he applies on the outside, as well as in defense. And I think that would have helped us a long way, especially in that first half and maybe a little bit in that third
mm.
quarter. But yeah, I'm glad that the team rallied, especially when Max kind of disappeared onto the bench for a bit and just took our advantage when we did to just try and nullify the extra percentage that Melbourne could have gotten.
Yeah, because in the end of the day, like in terms of scoring shots, there wasn't actually that much between the two teams. 20 scoring shots for Richmond, 24 scoring shots for Melbourne. And if you take the third quarter aside, Richmond actually spent more time in their forward half. So despite that one blitz where Melbourne definitely got on top of them, it was more just the fact of Richmond not quite getting their efficiency right. Obviously, they've got problems with their forward line that will just persist
Mm-hmm.
the whole season. Um, Despite kicking 4 goals nil in the last. So it was like they had their one efficient quarter that almost. Oh, I don't know if you want to see it getting them back in it because they, never really. But it was that
I
blitz.
think it was just stemming the bleeding. I don't think we ever really had a chance to completely take over.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things where sometimes it's straight shooting's a lot easier when there's like no expectation,
Mm.
sort of thing, But yeah, as I said, Richmond. Unfortunately, they're just rolling the dice in terms of their forward line. Trying to get a game where it lines up a bit better. Melbourne were a bit up and down, but as I said, that third quarter was probably their best quarter of the season. And yeah, sort of just put the game away. And, it was a bit like that. It was a very feeling out game. A lot of the possession getters in this game were from the back half,
Mm-hmm.
as both teams sort of struggled to convert scores for periods of time, as I sort of mentioned earlier. But you know what I mean? It's the impact players for Melbourne that sort of stood up and separated these two teams. Petrarca has really found his feet, and now you've got some smaller players that weren't as active in the first half of the season. First few games of the season. Like Sparrow and Chandler. Not Chandler, he's been around a bit, but you know what I mean, like with uh Fritsch not having the best season and all that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's finding midfield consistency from those sort of players, adding a few goals, adding offensively. Um, and yeah, and I said Bowie on halfback, although a lot of his possessions were cheap, like he generated a few score launches from the back half, which is like something Melbourne struggled to do all year. So the growth of Bowie is also sort of developed again. Again, Richmond were competitive. I don't know what your thoughts of it, but like I think outside of Nankervis, they looked a tiny bit vanilla. As I said, like you can see what they were doing with a lot of chains. It just normally broke down
Yeah.
once everything. Like, you know what I mean? It's like a typical Richmond game. They were just like a few neat possessions away from capitalizing from some
Yeah, there
okay
were,
structure.
especially in that first half, whenever a lot of our play was to kick down the wings into the packs, and Max Gorm just happened to
Mm.
always be there in every pack.
As I said, defensively, he's just really great at positioning,
He's
getting intercept marks.
he's easily like he is probably still. I mean, well, he's multiple All Australian for a reason. Like he
Mm,
is the best rock in the comp. As much as I wanna, give some
mm,
praise to Sherry for his continued hard work, for Tanan Curvis for always stepping up. Like
yeah.
Gorn is just an entirely different beast, and the fact that he always knows
Yeah.
where to be at pretty much always the right time there's no
Mm.
one that can really do that, especially as a ruck when you're that tall and you don't really have the huge amount of speed that the smalls do. Like to be able to just
Mm.
have that right positioning every moment is second to none.
Yeah, and obviously we're going to lead into talking about Max Gorn, but I
Mhm.
want to say also as well, it's also pretty big for Max Gorn because of the defensive injuries Melbourne's had this year in the toll. Like they've got some pretty solid depth down there. Not young depth, but depth. But like having him as a leader that can go back, if they're having to play like Marty Hoare or um, I forgot who the other one is. I'm gonna have to check, but you know what I mean. Like some of the younger,
Some of the more
uh,
raw
you know,
talent.
yeah, not first pick sort of players, or even allow someone like, as I said, again playing in the forward line, Harrison Petty. So it allows him to play forward, even though they, might want him in the back line a bit more often if they were struggling. So, he's just a very good stop filler, and as I said, I think we should, stop beating around the bush and go into his stats because it was a pretty big night.
It was so big, in fact, that he won the Frank Checker Hughes medal once again. I believe he was back-to-back winner because I think he won it last season as well. He finished with 34 headouts with 10 to advantage, 25 disposals, 19 of them effective, equating to 76% efficiency, 13 contested possessions, 6 intercepts, 9 marks, 5 contested, and 4 intercept, 6 clearances, a behind, 12 score involvements, 4 tackles, and 13 pressure acts. He probably could have done a little bit more on the tackling front, but I think he's the players that he has around him got most of that done anyway.
Yeah, well, as I said, like Tom Sparrow, who's the other one that had a heap?
Jack
Was it Varney?
Viney, who I'm about
Yeah,
to talk
Varney.
about.
Right, yeah. So yeah, they were pretty firing in the inside.
Quite literally, Jack Viney just wound back the clock in terms of how well he was using his body. He finished with 19 touches, 5 contested possessions, 4 inside 50s, 15 tackles. 15! With 6 of them inside
Yeah,
50, 24 pressure acts, and 389 meters gained.
yeah, it was one of those things where, we've commented on Varney before. Sometimes like his ball use isn't the best, but you know what I mean? When he can provide so much defensive pressure, like someone like an Oliver, linking up with Petrarca, linking up with Trent Rivers, who I think's no, actually no, he was back halfback. I was looking at the CPAs, but I think Chandler spent a bit of a time in the midfield. So you know what I mean? It's like the more body that they provide there, the easier it is for some of the other midfielders to get their work going.
Yeah, that's
And
exactly
you know
right.
what I mean? It's like his disposal hasn't been that great this year, but if you can get that pressure game going, it's something that Melbourne could really use right now.
Yes, absolutely. Christian Petrarca, as you mentioned before, he was immense. He looked like he was finally back to some solid form, how he normally is. He kicked 2 goals from 28 disposals, 22 of them effective, equating to 78.6% efficiency, 9 contested possessions, 7 marks, 6 inside 50s, 9 score involvements, 4 tackles, 16 pressure acts, and 7 ground ball gets. Jumping over to the Richmond front, I thought Thompson Dow played his best game for the club so far. He collected 28 touches, 21 of them effective, equating to 75% efficiency, 7 contested possessions, 7 marks, 7 score involvements, and 6 ground ball gets. And then Ryan Mansell, who was back from his 3 game suspension, was immense with pressure as he normally is. He kicked a goal from 7 touches, 6 effective, equating to 85.7% efficiency, 3 score involvements, 3 tackles, 26 pressure acts, and 2 1%ers. And then, as I mentioned before, shout out to our debutant Campbell Gray. He finished with 5 touches, 100, all of them effective, so 100% efficiency, 4 intercepts, 5 marks, 4 1%ers, and 3 spoils.
Yeah, and as I said, I guess the only thing I'll say about the Tigers is, this is the sort of game where again the lack of big bodies in their midfield sort of stood out because we talk about Melbourne's tackling pressure and all that, but again the fact that Melbourne outpossessed the Tigers whilst getting like what was it 70 tackles to like 40 or something.
Something like that,
You know
yeah.
what I mean? It was sort of like the Port game where I felt like they were trying to still put pressure on their opponents, trying to tackle them. Um, but you know what I mean? It wasn't working to the respect where their failure to do so opened out some outside chains. You
Hmm.
know what I mean? Like if you go to an opponent but still give them enough time to handball it, you can just always be chasing a shadow, which is sort of, again, how Port unwound them and sort of how, again, Melbourne did so, especially in that third quarter when they were actually starting to convert from forward movement. So, as I said, I don't, like I said, although people might see that and think it's disappointing, I didn't, well, at least from what I watch, yeah, they dropped their colours in the third, but I don't think it was like a dismal effort. It's just one of those things where, um, the sort of matchup just didn't really suit them.
It's like
And,
it's like one of the other games we're going to talk about that happened on Saturday, where there was a big third quarter fade out.
yeah, exactly. So, as I said, yeah, a bit disappointing for Richmond, but I think the most important thing is the way Melbourne went about it. For them to actually stamp authority on a game is just something we haven't really, well, we've only seen last week, really.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? They were just like teetering around for the first half, but, they end up getting it done. And, 2 games in a row, there's some teams that haven't even won 2 games in a row yet. So,
Yeah.
the more they build, the better they can try and reshape their season.
Yeah, pretty much. They're just hoping to keep carrying on this momentum, and so far so good, right?
Yeah, like I said, I've actually not looked at next week's matches, so I'm not sure who they're playing, but hopefully, they can build in a bit.
We will
It's a
touch on
Melbourne
that.
team, so it's like a good chance that they're staying in Victoria as well. So
Yeah, there's a fair chance of that. Just on the MRO front, Cosy Pickett was fined $1,000 for, you guessed it, contact with an umpire.
yeah,
They're not
I
gonna
think there's a
they're not
few of
gonna
those this
stop.
week.
It's gonna keep
No,
happening.
it's like they don't even listen to the Coast to Coast podcast, Blazy.
No, like every week I'm telling them to just stop going near the umpires
Mm.
and they won't get fined for it. But no, they just clearly they're not paying attention. Let's jump over to the big Anzac Day clash, the one that is constantly traditional, the one that's always there, and that's what started pretty much majority of the traditions that we have in the league
Mm.
nowadays. And it's the Collingwood versus Essendon clash.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not quite as high quality in terms of closeness as some of the clashes we've seen against these two sides. But in the wet, Collingwood just managed to have full control early in piece, and despite a really impressive comeback by the Dons, the last 40 minutes by the Pies was a mixture of both class and control as they restricted the Dons' outside ball movement and quality of shots. I will say the Dons did well to convert how they did, like 10-6 when you look at their scoring profile where they were taking their shots. Was actually pretty decent. But it was just not enough to mount an offense in this game. And, it's were the wet conditions making ball movement of halfback tricky. The game was pretty much decided as a forward half contest, which was stamped with authority by the Magpies midfield. We're talking about Steele Sidebottom, Nick Dacos, Darcy Cameron, Scott Pendlebury, and Jack Crisp on the outside. They really set the tone as Collingwood scored freely from both teams also getting a nice free centre bounce goals as well. And honestly, how good were Collingwood's handball? We know they're not the best kicking team. So when the rain comes and it sort of levels the playing field, it's just so much in Collingwood's favour because, they're a team that can do that extra handball in the wet. And you're not fearing as much that they're going to turn it over or overpossess. It's very hard, when you're spending so much energy contest to contest, and then Magpies just rinky dink it out, with a bit less pressure, a bit less pace, and just get forward movement so easily in conditions where you wouldn't expect so much fluidity in ball movement.
Yeah, no, it was really crazy as to how despite how wet it was, they really managed to take control of just having the game in the air. As much as wet conditions normally call for a scrappy game, low scoring, playing a lot more along the ground. Like they were taking a lot of strong contested marks, a lot of strong pack marks, and just
Mm.
keeping the ball out of Essendon's hands like very strongly.
Yeah, and I would say it's like Collingwood's defense was pretty smart, and Essendon were finding a way around it. That's why I said like 10-6 was impressive.
Mm.
Like, like how in the back line? Like, honestly, it's how does he mark the ball so cleanly uh, when it's so wet? Like his intercept marking game was not affected at all. And you know what I mean? It's like Essendon were good. They weren't just bumming it long. They were lowering their eyes. They were trying to get that higher hit up lead when it was available.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what I mean? It just made Essendon's attack more sparse and in restricted areas. Whereas then, because of Collingwood's handball chains, they were accessing all parts of the ground. They were getting the kick in with a bit less pressure, getting a few more one-on-one matchups, getting a few marks on lead in the forward line. And you know what I mean? It's like, I guess that's where some of the older heads sort of prevail in that area because, you know what I mean? It's like when you've played so many games in wet conditions, you sort of know your limitations a lot more. And like each player is less likely to make an error when you've got such a experienced midfield unit slash pretty much every line they've got experience. So,
Yeah.
you know, this was a game where I don't actually think Essendon were that bad. Like they just did a okay effort in the wet. It's just like how good was Collingwood, you know?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like Collingwood, as much as we were a little bit hesitant when they started the season as to where they exactly were and what exactly they were kind of structuring up as, because they did have, you know, a couple of shifts, like personnel, strategy wise, stuff like
Mm.
that. But now that we've kind of gotten a much better look at how they're playing and how they're performing, they're crazy. Like they're really, really good.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you could probably argue the Essendon's midfield probably didn't quite have their best game, which also sort of affected them. Like, I know Collingwood were good getting to the ball, but, you know, they're probably where at times they could have applied a bit more pressure. But again, it's just so hard because, as I said, once you get that quick handball game going, you know what I mean? Like, sometimes it's just hard when you're a side, you're like, oh, I don't want to overcommit in the tackle because, you know, once the handball goes, you're taking yourself out of like pressuring the next contest.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but at the same time, you know, they just needed to figure out a way and they just couldn't quite get their shape right. Again, young team, the midfield's still the best, but, you know, as I say, Collingwood's midfield just tore them apart, really. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, and the fact that the veteran players, specifically the first one that I'm about to talk about, are still
Mm,
putting in insane amounts of effort, like, and their bodies are
yeah.
still holding up incredibly well, is a credit one to Collingwood's medical and conditioning team, but also to
Mm.
the players themselves for being able to keep themselves fit and, you know, keep that same routine despite their age.
Yeah, and just to add on to the point, because I'm not sure if I've made the comment on the podcast, but I think people forget like stamina doesn't actually decrease as much as burst speed
Mm.
when you get older. You know what I mean? Like you can still keep yourself fit, especially in modern conditioning. Like some of these older players, they can run out of game. In fact, you probably their decision making is probably less affected by tiredness than like a young player that's like constantly running at burst speed. Because the older players like definitely choosing their moments a bit more. Um, Obviously, the first player you're going to talk about is known to, you know, do a bit of waddling from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, still putting in the effort, still pumping the legs, but just, you know, not as quickly across the ground as maybe like a Bobby Hill can do.
Or either of the
But yeah,
Dacosses,
as
for
I
an
said,
example.
yeah, and exactly. And it's not like his disposal, especially by foot, was as good. But you know what I mean? Like, it was still smart possessions. Like his, you know, as I said, even though he was going at like whatever it was, like 50%, like he was still getting the ball where it needed to go.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, as I said, it was probably one of the more dominant, you know, probably one of the more dominant medal winners for someone his age.
Oh
You know what
yeah,
I mean?
absolutely. Like he's what? For no, we're talking about steel side bottom. He's what,
Yeah.
like 34, I think.
Oh, I think so. He's long in the tooth, that's for sure.
Yeah,
34, yep.
yeah. There you go. Yeah, so like, and he mentioned in an interview, I think for the medal interview, actually, I think he mentioned that as long as his body's fit, as long as he's going well at it, he's willing to keep playing. Pretty
Mm.
much the same sort of situation that Dangerfield is in right now, because he's 35 and he's still going
Mm.
at pretty much the same sort of efficiency.
I'd say probably more Callum Ward is the
Oh
direct
yeah, that too.
comparison. Like still being useful on the wing. Can even go inside. Probably not like in the center clearances, but the stoppage clearances.
True, because
Whether
when
at
you
left
look at
forward,
when you look
down
at
back.
Danger, he is playing a lot more forward. What like kind of
Yeah,
what Dusty was
exactly. Like
doing later in his career.
yeah, like still as good as he is, it's not really a known goal kicker.
Yeah.
But as I said, he's just really good in transition play. Um, and yeah, as I said, he just gets that ball moving. Probably Collingwood's outside game is, without looking at the stats, I'm guessing it's a bit better than it was last year, where they were a bit stop-start with some of their movements. So, his rise has definitely impacted the way that Collingwood's able to be more consistent this year.
Absolutely. So he won the ANZAC medal this season in this game. His first one was in 2016, so 9 years later, he's won his second. It was basically a winding back the clock kind of performance. He finished with 35 disposals, 22 contested possessions, 7 inside 50s, 15 clearances, 4 tackles, 19 pressure acts, 4 1%ers, 14 ground ball gets, and 598 meters gained. Like, and it's crazy. Like, how for a man that's
Yeah, I
34
know.
years old, how can you still do so much?
And yeah, as I said, so his 15 clearances was 4 above the next couple, one being Luke Davies-Uniacke with 11, and the other, funnily enough, being his partner in crime, Nick Dacos.
Hmm.
So, you know what I mean? It's not like Collingwood were, you know, uh, needing him to do the bulk of the work, because they were still having someone that was absolutely shredding. Um, which is again why I said Essendon maybe probably lowered their colours a bit in stoppage. They probably needed to find a bit of way to pressure, but yeah, I said it might have just been a case of two players firing at the same time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Next on my list is Jamie Elliott. He was on fire up forward. He kicked 5-1 from 19 touches, 8 marks with 5 of them inside 50, 3 inside 50s, 11 score involvements, 12 pressure acts, and 2 1%ers. And then our big man, Big Billy Frampton. He was immense in defense this week. He collected 15 disposals. All of them were effective to 100% efficiency. 4 contested possessions, 4 intercepts, 6 marks, 13 1%ers, 10 spoils, and 95% time on ground.
Yeah, no, it's always good to see. And, as I said, yeah, it wasn't like really Bride's conditions. He still could kick 2 goals, but like still held him to only the 2 marks. So I'm
Mm.
not even sure if any of those were inside 50. So you know what I mean? I felt like Wright was a bit more useful as the second ruck than in the forward line.
Well, I was kind of thinking the same thing because even last week he was being used as a ruck fairly effectively, Peter Wright, and like Essendon
Yeah.
had a much better look with him kind of doing that second ruck rotating forward kind of position.
I think it's just like the condition. I think he worked well as a forward last week.
Oh yeah, no, that too,
But you
but
know
like
what I mean? It's like you got to have that flexibility. Like if a big rain game does happen, Peter Wright, is still getting back in. Um, so you just have to find ways to make him useful. And
mm,
as I said, I didn't like fully watch the game. I watched a tiny bit, heard a lot of the radio call, but you know what I mean. It's like um, when you got a toll and they can't get involved one way, you have to try and be fairly flexible to get them involved the other way. And yeah, as I said, he still had an okay game, but yeah, it definitely Billy Frampton, was that mesh in pretty solid Collingwood defence, forced everything high, pretty much no deep entries from Collingwood. So yeah, they were very much firing in the back line, indeed.
absolutely. Speaking of Essendon's rock woes at the moment, they did have to bring back Todd Goldstein as we thought they would. But I think he stood his ground fairly well against Darcy Cameron. He finished with 38 hitouts, 11 to advantage, and 13 touches, 8 contested possessions, 4 clearances, 6 1%ers, and 5 spoils. We know that because they're missing Brian and now Draper, he's had to come back in. He is basically an emergency at this point because he's also been kind of working as their ruck coach. But he's still, conditions weren't exactly ideal, but he still kind of got it. He's still being able to fill that role.
I think the problem is, and as I said, this isn't Goldstein, because you're like, when you get to the third ruckman, you got to know where you lay with people, and like, Doug Goldstein, like, straight up, is a liability around the ground. Like, Darcy Cameron was running around, but if you're going to be a liability, to still get the tap works, hit enough to advantages, still even get a few clearances on his own. You know what I mean? It's just, it's just one of those things where he's still providing enough value. They say, you know what? You haven't just lost the ruck contest. Like, there's stuff that he can provide, even if he is going to give up a bit around the ground.
Yeah, absolutely.
You might always have mobile ruckmans like Darcy Cameron. Like,
plus, as a veteran talent in that team, like, he's still able to provide a bit of leadership quality, a bit of leadership factor as well.
Yeah. Especially, and then it means, like, it's not just Zach Merritt in that midfield group talking to his younger midfielders around him. It's like you get a communication with Goldstein, in terms of positioning, in terms of shape, just have that level head. And, we always talk about Zach Merritt having to face the brunt of it. And you know what? Going off a bit of a side tangent, I said I was listening to a lot of radio. He was actually doing the call on ABC Radio for the St Kilda Brisbane game. And geez, he is a switched on individual. Like, you see him and is a tough nut, but his ability to read the game, like, it's almost automatic. And then you hear him talk about football, and it's no real surprise why. He's got a fairly solid understanding. But
yeah, a lot of the midfielders in the game are like that. Like, as much as Dusty hated the spotlight, he's easily had one of the best footy brains in the competition at the time. Like, his ability to be able to read and understand a play, it was incredible, even if his body couldn't keep up with it all the time.
Yeah, I think that's the awkward thing about leadership is, like, unfortunately, you've got to be a rare person that understands the game and is a good communicator. Which is pretty rare. And, like, Merrick gets a bit of a heat because he's, like, a soft-spoken, he seems like a nice guy sort of individual. But, as I said, when you know your stuff, and it seems like Essendon's, as I said, not so much this game, but overall, like, their midfield's a lot better than it has been in past iterations.
Yeah, 100%.
But yeah, that's a bit of a side tangent.
Speaking of their midfield, the last player that I did want to touch on is Sam Durham. I thought he did very well with pressure and ball movement. He kicked 2 goals from 19 disposals, 12 contested possessions, 4 inside 50s, 6 clearances, 5 tackles, 26 pressure acts, 7 ground ball gets, and 330 meters gained.
Yeah, so, as I said, honestly, I also thought their outside was, sort of okay. Zave Dersma, again, in the wet. I think, like, that bit of speed, like, he's been struggling to, like, fully get into the game. But you know what I mean? It's like, on occasions, he was actually sort of able to, like, outpace Lipinski. Or, again, I assume they did, from what I heard from the radio call.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? So, as I said, even though it was a bit of a down, well, if you just looked on paper, it was a bit of a down game. I think they're still a bit, it's just they came against a pretty complete Collingwood side, and their midfield just didn't quite provide enough. And, it's the bits around the ground that they've always sort of had. You know what I mean? They're a developing team. But, they made the most of their opportunities. They've got things to build on. It's just shrug your shoulders and get on to next week.
Yeah, exactly right. However, there was some injuries from the game this week. Dan McStay did a knee injury. It was confirmed to be an MCL strain. Thankfully, not an ACL. He'll still be out for a fair while, but he will come back sometime this season, thankfully.
Yeah. I think they said about a 3-month time frame.
Yeah, I think the estimation was roughly July, August sort of time frame.
Yeah.
And then Harry...
No, it's a bit less.
Give or take. And then Harry
Yeah.
Jones for the Bombers did an ankle. I don't know if it was super serious. It might have been a tweak, might have been a roll, something like that. But I think he's still probably going to miss a couple of weeks anyway. But hopefully all is well. Otherwise,
Yeah.
all right. Shall we jump
All right.
over
We'll go to,
to
yeah,
the
part
game?
two of Anzac Friday.
Part two of Anzac Day being Fremantle and Adelaide, where they put on a pretty spectacular pregame.
Yeah, the Len Hole tribute match is very well done. And it has been for a number of years. And as I said, I was actually in the CBD a bit beforehand. Um, and it was so weird because obviously it was very quiet because of it being Anzac Day. But like the only few people were Freo fans and like not a few Adelaide supporters, but like you could tell like they were fairly buzzing. Um, Obviously, though, the way the AFL scheduled it, I imagine there would have been a few people asleep. People who've gone to the dawn service and going to this game, which started at 6:10 our time. A bit rough, let's be honest. As said, especially for some of the older veterans
Mm-hmm.
having to do that. But in terms of, the way they've orchestrated it is very respectful, and I've always liked that. So yeah, that's a bit of the early thing. In terms of the game itself, I think Freo were, I know there's a lot said about the late quarter collapse, but overall, I think they actually came back a lot from their, what I thought was just like defensive capitulation against Melbourne. And it was really a whole team defensive effort that managed to shut down Adelaide's run and carry
Mm-hmm.
from halfback, and it really dried up their entries. Adelaide really struggled to get their offense going. Um, Again, Adelaide didn't let them like completely run over. They did get a few in the last quarter, and if Adelaide could kick straight, especially in the last half, third quarter was where they missed their most opportunities. There probably would be more concerns about how Freo sort of left the door open them in the last quarter. Missed opportunities by Luke Nankervis and Alex Neil-Bullen sort of left them off the hook. And, they sort of stood tall in the contest nonetheless. There were just some obvious areas where you could not see them going. They couldn't really get too much back. It was only 18 points in the end, but it was 12-13, 85 to 9-13, 67. So that's 5 more scoring shots to Freo. Stats and pressure-wise, this game was actually pretty even. For the most part, Freo were taking the Adelaide were making more from their 10 less inside 50s by smashing Freo in terms of marks and tackles in their own forward 50. They actually set up their forward game going a bit more than they did their back half going, which is a bit opposite to the way they normally play. But Freo sort of forced that because their midfield pressure, Sarong and Brayshaw are absolutely dominating in the clearances, both scoring 5 score launches apiece. That's when you generate a scoring chain from your first possession. Yeah, the Dockers just outscored from stoppage pretty handily. Adelaide sort of needed to rely on their other options to generate their disposal use. Their midfield, unfortunately, were pretty bad in that area. And I'm going to go into it a bit, but, like Jordan Dawson, the captain, he's had a mixed bag this year, but this was sort of, it sort of personified some of Adelaide's midfield woes. He was a bit of a turnover merchant. Only 1 handball, a lot of kicks, and so many of those were turnovers.
Mm-hmm.
And it sort of set the tone for the difference between those two teams because, again, Freo were applying the pressure to force Adelaide to get a turnover dump kick instead of their setup kicks. And as I said, that really made their offense struggle to start for the entire night.
Yeah, that's right. Freo just looked Freo just looked dominant for once. Like we've seen them kind of have. I mean, apart from obviously the game and gather out against Richmond, we've seen them mostly just kind of have very kind of inconsistent sort of games. Like they've been good, but they haven't been consistently good. But this was the first game where they really took control and they didn't really, as much as the score kind of looks close, 85 to 67. Like, it doesn't really look like they ever gave Adelaide a proper shot at taking control up until, like, the fourth.
Yeah, and that's what I'm gonna say. It's like in defense of Fremantle, I'm pretty sure that with their clearance dominance, had Adelaide kicked a few more of those, it wouldn't necessarily, get chain sort of results because again, the biggest problem with like X score or like even, just looking at the behind tally is that sometimes behinds just lead to further behinds. If you got your forward half going, um, which Adelaide did, they're actually better set up from the kick in than the centre square.
Mm.
But you know what I mean? So you can't always say that, yeah, Adelaide just kicked themselves out of it. And, as I said, Dockers also kicked 13 points. Like, they just had more scores anyway. Um, but, as I said, what I will say is that probably, as I said, there's still that feeling that Freo is sometimes a bit loose at times, especially in situations where they're not. But I don't think this one was an area where it was like, stoppages that, they lose all the time or whatever. I think this was just more of a case of, a few individual forward efforts by Adelaide sort of just keeping them in. And, you still got to give them respect. Like, they were a pretty red hot team coming into this. Yeah, they lost against the Suns, but they had that pretty emphatic win against GWS. And, everyone thought they were going to get their offense going. I certainly did. I thought they were going to pick apart Frio's defense, but
Yep, I thought
yeah,
the
they
same
just
thing.
stood strong.
Yeah, yeah.
And,
Freo was
it's
just
a real credit to them.
absolutely. Freo, to their absolute credit, like, yeah, as we just talked about, their defensive game so much more impressive than what it's been in past couple of weeks. For Adelaide, the finger/hand injury with Thilthorpe was just unfortunate timing because they really could have used him when he went off the ground. I
Yeah.
did just read an article that it's confirmed that it's not a serious injury. It was just a hairline fracture.
Yeah.
So he's still going to be able to train for the game upcoming this week.
Probably just
Whether he
him with a
plays or
bit more
not,
tape.
we'll see. Um, but yeah, like it's not exactly like Adelaide's forward plans didn't didn't entirely work. Like they kicked 9-13, so the 13 behinds definitely did hurt them. But their transition just from their midfield to their forward line, Fremantle were able to handle so well. And it just stopped and like
Yeah,
that
exactly.
Fremantle's midfield being able to shut down a lot of that ball movement is super impressive, and it shows that maybe Fremantle are finally going to be a little bit more consistent than what we've seen in recent weeks.
Yeah, and I do also want to flip the script a bit, and talk about Adelaide's midfield because, when we say that, it's like, oh, and it's like, and we're talking about defensive efforts still, but Fremantle did lose the tackle count, 53-72. So it was actually Adelaide putting on the tackle pressure. So what we're talking about, and there was a few midfields that tackle, but like if you look at it, like Adelaide's midfield by far tackled Freo.
Mm.
But you know what I mean? It's sort of that mixture of both implied pressure and positioning. And it sort of exposed some of the weaknesses that Adelaide have in that midfield. We talked about it last year because if you looked at their wins, and I did like a little look at it, for the Crows, it's like a very simple formula for their wins and losses. If they win the inside 50 count, they tend to win the game. Like, we know that. They've got a really good forward line. They tend to convert very truly. Like, they had less opportunities this game, but converted pretty well. And, as I said, that's a very simplistic overview. But when you watch them play, having to rely so much on their back half movement compared to other teams, especially some of I call them softer, but what I mean by that is they allow a lot of uncontested marks. They allow you to like work it out of your back line, which Freo don't so much. They like doing it themselves. They don't like oppositions doing that.
Yeah.
So, like Freo, they're not going to give you as many options from turnover as, as I said, other midfield units as well. So, with the other teams that played, high turnover based teams, that's when you can launch from your back half. So you know what I mean? It's like, you talk about the soft schedule for Adelaide, but like that's why I think in some of these tougher matchups, their attack hasn't looked so solid.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I think it's also, as I said, with them being a more outside run midfield team, I think we're seeing some instability because, when you look at their midfield, which is very good, but it's very unsustainable against quality opposition because their midfield unit feels pressured into those dump kicks. And look, I'm going to be honest. The site I use, Wheelo Ratings, it's actually added a few more stats for individual performances, and
Oh,
one
yeah.
of the ones it has, it's called it's a kick threat rating and a basically a kick retention rating.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means is like in any given situation, what's the likelihood compared to league average of your team retaining the ball after that individual possession? And, Jordan Dawson, again, like in this game, he had so much use of the ball. But he's a player that's going at I think it's about 30% retention rate from his disposals, from his kicks, I should say.
Oh, yeah.
And, when he's a ball user, that's, 20 kicks, one handball, he's getting the bulk of that work, It's sort of undoing Adelaide's ball winning. Because again, they're not a heavily, what do you call it? A heavy clearance team or all that,
Mm-hmm.
And it's like the ones that do, it just gets blazed forward, and, again, this is where I'm talking about implied pressure. Obviously, Freo, with them winning the ball and being so dangerous, Adelaide definitely wanted to just get the territory.
Yeah.
Because as I said, if they win the inside 50s, they tend to win the game. But they just need to be a bit more disciplined. And I'm not going to put it all on Jordan Dawson. Like, I know I've been a bit critical on him at times. But really, that's just like, in the rankings of being like a top 20 midfielder, where
Yeah,
some
that's
people
right.
say he is, or top 20 player in the league, even. I just think it's a fraction down of that because of it. But it's really just the shape of Adelaide's midfield. They're working into Matt Crouch again. As I said, they've gotten that excitement from Isaac Rankin that bursts into it. But even with the additions that they got, James Peatling, again, maybe even from the outside with Isaac coming,
Mm-hmm.
they still just can't quite get that inside to outside connection going. Great on the outside connection, running off the wing, outside inside, or D50 straight through the middle. It's pretty good. But if you get a stoppage and you force the ball up for Adelaide, I think more likely than not they're going to lose it. And against Freo, who, again, have good stoppage winning midfielders, that's sort of where they came unstuck this week. And I think they might find in a lot of those matchups, they could struggle. So, as I said, while they look good, I'm not too pessimistic on them. I think that's sort of uncovering a bit of a weakness for Adelaide at the moment.
Yeah, I think I completely agree on that. And whilst we know that Adelaide can definitely be an insanely strong team, finding those weaknesses and other teams exploiting those weaknesses is definitely going to be something that they have to figure out now. That how they are going to either fill that hole or, I guess, overlap some other players and their roles to just cover that until they can figure out how to permanently fill that hole, essentially. But jumping over to Fremantle, I figure we should start on our individuals. So I'm going to talk about Andy Brayshaw. He was the Arthur Leggett medalist. He was complete. He was so immense in the midfield, finishing with 37 disposals. 26 of them were effective, equating to 70.3% efficiency. 17 contested possessions, 8 intercepts, 4 marks, 8 inside 50s, 6 clearances. He kicked up behind. Sadly, not a goal to kind of cap out the night. 9 score involvements, 5 tackles, 17 pressure acts, 2 1%ers, 9 ground ball gets, and 522 metres gained. Sean Darcy was impressive in the ruck this week, getting 36 headouts, 14 to advantage, and 8 touches, 5 contested possessions, 5 clearances, 5 tackles, 4 1%ers, and 4 spoils. And then Luke Ryan, I thought was really, really fluid with ball movement. He collected 23 disposals, 17 of them effective, equating to 73.9% efficiency, 4 intercepts, 9 marks, 3 of them being intercept marks, 4 score involvements, and 681 metres gained. Jumping over to Adelaide, Josh Worrell looks really composed in defence. despite the fact that he did have a couple of goals kicked on him. But he finished with 20 touches, 18 effective, equating to 90% efficiency, 8 contested possessions, 9 intercepts, 5 marks, 5 score involvements, 3 1%ers, 6 scramble gets, and 3 spoils. And then Riley Thilthorpe, despite going off the ground for a while due to the injury that I mentioned just before, he was a leading scorer on the field, kicking 3-2 from 9 disposals, 8 contested possessions, 6 score involvements, and 3 ground ball gets.
Yeah, and I said it's going to be a very interesting thing. You mentioned Riley Thilthorpe's finger injury, but I think forward line, again, he's just proven to be a little tough bugger, isn't he? Like, he definitely was strong playing through that match, but I think the biggest impact will be the second rock. Because, again, Riley O'Brien, like, he's a bulk tapman. He's, like, one of the, like, normally during the league, he's one of the actual highest hit-out count ruckmen. He's just not as good around the ground, and sometimes his stats can be very vanilla. And I think Riley Thilthorpe, we've seen him in a few contests, like, have more creative clearances, more creative tap work. In fact, it sort of got what, like Adelaide out of stale midfield movements at times in terms of from stoppages. So
Yeah.
I think that might be missed if he is not able to provide that second ruck contest. I still think he did take some of the tap work in the second half, but, as I said, that might be something that the doctor's like, if you don't want to do any further damage, you probably should stop doing that. Make sure it heals first.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially if he's still wanting to play against Carlton this week. I believe that's who they're playing. Yeah, he definitely wants to try and take care of that as much as possible. Especially if he's like avoiding surgery on it. Jumping over to the MRO, Mitch Hinge was banned for 1 match for striking Andy Brayshaw. It was pretty clear cut from what I saw, so kind of no other complaints there. And then Josh Worrell was fined $2,000 for rough conduct against Michael Frederick. I also learned in the report what Michael Frederick's actual first name is, and
yeah,
it was a jump scare for me.
It's like Maeta.
Yeah, it's like miasma or something like that. Hang on, I'll re-find it.
Yeah, I was gonna say miasma's not really a good first name. You don't want to like have that hanging around you, unless it means something in another culture. Monero. Okay. Yeah. So as I said, it'll be interesting because I need to look up Martin Frederick. He used to play for Port Adelaide. I'm guessing that that's not his given name, but yeah, I don't know. Like, if he ever wants to like bust it out, I'd be down for it. I love a good unique name, and I think it's one of the unique things about football is like,
it's so
obviously
multicultural.
commentators say that. Yeah, well, you know what I mean, and it gets people to learn name pronunciations, and it's like for the next generation, when you pick up on those things, it just makes it the less awkward roll call out if you know a few of the quirks that you can get from names of other languages. So
yeah, especially when
him,
we've got so many indigenous players. We've got players from from a Sudanese background now. We've got we've had a couple of Asian heritage players. We have
obviously Irish names, the ones that are derived from Gaelic that can be a bit.
We've got
confusing.
plenty of Europeans, but like the Italians and players like that, like Massimo D'Ambrosio, for example, like, extremely long name, but it's surprisingly easy to pronounce.
Yeah, underrated, cool name in the league.
Absolutely, Massimo.
It's like his name is big, Massimo. It's not like Minimo D'Ambrosio.
No, considering he has maximum impact, it makes sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of a team with maximum impact, we're jumping over to the reigning premiers for our first Saturday game now, and that is St Kilda and the Brisbane Lions at Marvel Stadium.
And I think this was a weird game as well. Brisbane were very quick to bounce back from the capitulation they had last week, and the Lions were just good, way too good from the middle of the ground. Had some pretty great movement from the back half as well, always resulting in score, but allowing Brisbane to lock the ball in their forward half. And it resulted in the Saints having very sparse offensive production. Another team sort of like Essendon, probably lucky to get 73, but you know, when Essendon's was like from trying hard, I feel like St Kilda's forward line sort of bailed out some of the weaker efforts, again, from their like inside midfield and the bit of hit and miss transition from the back line. Um, as I said, at least they did when they get the hands on the ball, they did score well.
Mhm.
But apart from that, they got pretty much creamed in terms of possession stats. They did have a third quarter revival, but it almost felt like junk time goals. As again, after Brisbane sort of, let them score a bit, they just went on the throat, finished off the game very impressively. It finished up being 11-7, 73 to the Lions 17-16, 118.
Yeah, looking
It's
at that scoreline, Brisbane definitely could have done a lot more damage than they did. Like 40, like granted, a 45-point margin, still very solid. You're not going to have many faults about that. But 16 behinds, and I know that, and I do talk about this in my individuals. Like St Kilda's defense did hold up in some places, so a lot of those behinds, as provided they're not from set shot, probably were affected by very solid defensive efforts. But
yeah.
yeah, Brisbane definitely could have done a lot more damage than they really did.
Yeah, there was a few rush behinds as well. Because again, well, sorry, I need to look at it.
No, you're good.
But yeah, as I said, in terms of the scoring profiles, I'll just give it to you quickly. Set shots, 22 set shots for 11-8,
Mm-hmm.
and general play, they were 6-6. So they weren't actually negative in any of the scoring stats,
Oh yeah.
so to speak. But they did still miss opportunities relative to ease. So, it's a bit give or take there. But yeah, as I said, I think scoring wise, it's like a bit shrug your shoulders. It's possession wise that should really struggle, concern St Kilda, because they had 2 quarters where they were absolutely dominated. And the funny thing is, one of those was the third quarter as well. It's just that the Saints scored 4 goals, 1 from 5 scoring shots,
Oh yeah.
while Brisbane from 11 scoring shots scored 4 goal, 4. So, you know what I mean? It's like, despite having a 71% time in Brisbane's forward half. So that's what I meant, like their forward line, especially near to the top Coleman medalist,
Jack
Jack
Higgins. I
Higgins.
was looking at the
He
Coleman
was,
medal list earlier today, actually, and the fact that he's sitting so
mm,
high, considering all the other players currently at the top of the Coleman medal list, is super impressive.
yeah, because again, like St Kilda didn't even get like 43 inside 50 is like that's a passable amount. Like you're not going to get too many wins, like maybe if it's a Dow contest, but
Mm.
again, like that's something where you might get like 50 odd points, maybe a bit more, but like 70 was pretty good. 7 marks inside 50, while it is all right, they gave up 18, and they only got 6 set shots themselves, so they just had to rely on general play conversion. That's what I'm saying. It's like the more I watch the Saints, like, yeah, they've been impressive at times, but they are just so opportunistic. Like sometimes you feel like they're creating more than they should just have come naturally,
Yeah.
which is a bit of concerning. Um, again, they had 0 forward half score, and forward half goals, I should say. I think they had a few behinds, but and only 1-2 from general play stoppages. So really unsustainable. A lot of it were coming from Brisbane turnovers, and that's converting well off them. And you know what I mean? It's like Brisbane's not going to care about the amount of turnovers that they had, because like they were winning the ball, they were threatening with the handball chains, and you know what I mean? Like they were just getting their offense going. So it's like, who cares that they're giving up a goal every now and then if they're generating 3 or 4 goals from their own movement?
Yeah.
So I think the other thing to come out from this match as well, St Kilda are not a defensive team anymore. They have hit rock bottom for allowing set shots inside their 50, being 8% more likely last year for an inside 50 to result in a set shot on goal, and now can see the third most set shots against for the year. it's a bit weird because primarily Wilkie, their back six, I should say, Wilkie, Nasaya, Caminiti, and Burns don't individually, at least statistically, look that much worse than last year. But as I said, their overall structure, they're still being forced into harder and harder to defend contest. And just how lacking height and body now, with Battle disappearing from their side, to actually defend it.
Yeah.
And, when you get a team where at full force, Brisbane are fairly unstoppable anyway, as I said, it sort of just capitulated from them. And it's like, it's just so weird. It's like, it's almost like they can't decide. You know what I mean? It's like they can get an offensive game going. Last year, they can get a defensive game going, but they just can't find the balance. And you see, even with some of Nazai Wanganeen, Malira's possessions, like a great halfback. And you sort of touched on it too a bit, as a cautionary thing. Like, as good as he is, like some of his turnovers, I feel like get very strong rebounds from.
Mm-hmm.
And, again, that comes up from some of, because I don't want to put it on here, because I think their transition
in general just
isn't that
good.
great.
Yeah,
it's
right.
definitely dropped off from last year, which was consistently fantastic. Like last year, their forward half pressure was abysmal. Whereas this year, they still generate a lot from their halfback, but they're just not converting as much. And, it's up the ground stuff that sort of lost a bit of shape. And, they've got players they're working on. But again, it's a lot of shuffling around, and you just don't know what you're going to get from individuals at St Kilda. And it almost feels like the coach is a bit half and half. And, like, it was a bit of the thing. Ross Lyon made the decision to sub off Hugo Garcia at pretty much after quarter time. Only played 20% of the game, had, 4 possessions, 2 marks, 1 tackle, and a contested possession at that time. So, like, not even the worst. Like, Isaac Keeler was at a donor at that time. But, like, he gets subbed off. And, you look at his post-match interview and it's like he's having a go at the journalist for, like, inquiring, like, what the thought process was there. As if, like, he was like, oh, I don't know if you understand about, like, forward chain, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, like, you can say that if it's, like, having a direct effect. Like, you should just be able to tell your reporter, okay, this is what we wanted to do. Like, even if he just said, oh, Zach Jones, like, just say, oh, we want more pressure in forward half contest. Like, you need to explain that.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, we're just not seeing the result for some of the movements of St Kilda. Like,
Agreed.
they started the year off well. They're just starting to step back a bit, and it's a bit concerning.
I mean, granted, this game was up against the reigning premiers, so you can't. I mean, from that sort of perspective, you can't fault them that much for getting beaten in a lot of areas. But we know that St Kilda are better than what they showed, and we know, I think, and as you just mentioned, like Wanganeen Miller, I spoke about this like at the start of the year. Like, he's a great player already, but his decision making skills in some areas are still a little questionable, and we did see that in this match. And this is something that time he'll eventually get better at. The Hugo Garcia stuff, like, again, Alex Keeler. Keeler? Yeah, Alex is his first name? Is that what you said?
Yeah, Isaac Keeler.
Isaac Keeler. Thank you very much. I was thinking about Alex Toru, which I have some news on him, which I will talk about at the end of this. But yeah, like, those younger players, it'll take a bit more time for them to, fully get to where Ross wants them to be. And that's just about learning their specific craft and what, like, the specific areas that he wants them to focus on. But you can't take them out of games if they're not giving you what you want straight away. Like, it's all about time and process. And we saw this in one of the later games where, actually the West Coast game, where Harley Reid kind of didn't really do much in that first quarter. But he started to get his game going as the game went on, and he had a pretty solid impact despite the outcome. So you just got to give these younger players just time.
Yeah, and it's like, I know we're not, like, in the coach's office. We, like, Hugo Garcia could have, like, have broken the number one thing Ross said during the week not to break or whatever, like made a couple of irredeemable mistakes. Who knows?
Yeah.
I haven't analyzed that performance so closely, but you know what I mean? It's like in those waves of oh, you take him out, in a vacuum, that's fine. But again, you switch Caminiti forward and back. You change where Darcy Wilson plays, when Hagger tags sometimes when Hagger goes in the forward line. And it's for a young team, sometimes you just got to let them settle. And I think that's sort of what's changed my view on St Kilda to a team that could probably get a few games to going to where they'll be at least, and this is optimistically, very stop-start. We've seen how they can get their pressure going. We've seen the creativity of their forward line reviving their offense. But until they can get, the rest of their positions set, I think we're just going to see it come and go in terms of actually winning games.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had this sort of situation with St Kilda last season where they were just so inconsistent, even in games where, they should have been a lot more competitive in. They should have won in a lot of cases. And granted, we saw a little bit of that pick up in the second half of last season, where they started stringing some wins together, started getting some solid momentum.
Yeah.
But now that they've kind of, and they did carry a little bit of that into this season, but now they've started to kind of drift back just a little bit into their old habits, and it's and I want to kind of just compare this to Sam Lawler, because a lot of the game against Melbourne, he was playing more up forward rather than in the guts where we need him, and because we looked so much better with him in the guts in the midfield, whereas we look a little bit weaker when he's assigned to rotate forward, and it's not ideal. And I get, he's a young player. You got to manage his tank, that sort of stuff. But just gotta, he's arguably our best midfielder when he's in the midfield. So you got to, you got to give those players that sort of time to have that sort of impact that that they can have.
But I won't go on this too much. But to the last point is you're talking about a first year player. We're talking about players that are, getting into their fourth or fifth year, Anthony Caminiti. Darcy Wilson's in his second year, but Burns has been around the system for a lot. Even well, you know what I mean, Cooper Sharman, to start his career, sort of got switched around a lot. Liam Stocker's another one. Sometimes sometimes he gets the game put around him. Sometimes he just drifts in and out of contests, and you know what I mean. It's so as I said, it's just the consistency of the 3 to 5 year players just comes and goes so much, and you can't have that on the side. If you're a competitive side, you need your mid-range players to be that consistent backbone. Where you know what you're going to get out of them, and I think that's what St Kilda lacks at the moment. Whether that's internal, whether it's the magnet pieces, I'm not sure. I'm a bit skeptical on Ross, but as I said, we'll let him see. We'll have him a week to respond. But as I said, structurally, it just seems off for me.
Yeah, I completely agree. Enough about the game analysis. Let's jump over to our individuals, because we have been going for a while on that topic. So obviously, I'm going to start with Brisbane. Eric Hipwood was consistent up forward, now settling back into that number one tall role as he used to be. He kicked 4-2 from 14 disposals, 10 of them effective, equating to 71.4% efficiency, 5 contested possessions, 8 marks, with 5 of them inside 50, 4 inside 50s overall, and 10 score involvements. Hugh McCluggage was immense, as he often is. He kicked a goal from 21 touches, 7 contested possessions, 4 marks, 5 inside 50s, 6 clearances, 9 score involvements, 11 tackles, 35 pressure acts, and 6 ground ball gets. And then co-captain Lockie Neal is looking back to his best. He kicked 3 goals from 31 disposals, 24 of them effective, equating to 77.4% efficiency, 11 contested possessions, 6 marks, 8 inside 50s, 5 clearances, 12 score involvements, 4 tackles with 3 of them inside 50, 28 pressure acts, 7 ground ball gets, and 493 metres gained. Captain Jack Steele for St Kilda was immense on ball. He finished with 29 disposals, 23 of them effective, equating to 73.9% efficiency, 19 contested possessions, 9 clearances, 4 score involvements, 6 tackles, 22 pressure acts, and 13 ground ball gets. And then Cal Wilkie, as you did mention earlier, he's doing wonders in defense because individually, it still looks fairly solid. He collected 21 disposals, 18 of them effective, equating to 85.7% efficiency, 5 contested possessions, 8 intercepts, 6 marks, with 3 of them being intercept marks, 10 1%ers, 9 spoils, and 100% time on ground.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, they've still got a few performers each week, and I said it's not irredeemable. The situation they're in. It's just as I said, as I mentioned, some of the systematic things for me are more concerning. So,
Yeah,
but we'll quickly move on from this because, as I said, we have
it's been
definitely made our point there.
definitely 100%. On the injury front, Mason Wood did suffer a concussion during this game, so he will miss this week's game. I'm unsure who they're facing, but he will miss it. Kyle Oman has redone another injury on his left shoulder this time. I don't know how serious it is, but he might be out again for another couple of weeks. And Jack Payne with a late change. He's out with illness. It is cold and flu season after all, so no wonder a lot of these players are getting that a little early, or a couple of stomach bugs going around. It just do be how it
Yeah,
do be.
he wasn't the one that got norovirus, was he?
I don't know. I don't know. Might have been. I have no idea.
You don't, scratch that. I'd know who I'm thinking of. Never mind.
On the
I'm thinking of the NBA.
well, there you go.
Wrong
That
code.
completely different code. On the
Yeah.
MRO front, Noah Answorth was fined $2,000 for striking Jack Higgins. Liam Stocker was fined $2,000 for tripping Zach Bailey. And news broke half an hour ago. I know you've been anticipating Alex Toru's eventual introduction into the AFL and to play his first AFL game, but you're going to have to wait a little bit longer because he has suffered a 4-match ban in the VFL
Oh, really?
for a massive,
Oh,
dangerous
that's
tackle.
unfortunate.
Uh,
Yeah, because again, I think he was. I can't remember what sort of injury, but he did pick up something. Um, so that's what I said. Like a lot of people thought
he
Travaglia and Taro
he was
were going to debut at
initially
the same time.
unavailable for selection due to a long-term stress fracture in his back,
Yeah,
and
which again,
now
it's not something you want to hear after you draft
no,
someone.
and now he's now he's going to be out for at least a month, due to a dangerous tackle. That yeah, I'm not looking at the footage, but I'm reading the report on it, and it's not pretty. So I think
Okay,
4 matches is very
4
much
months.
warranted.
Yeah, 4 months. Yeah, yeah. I think there's another one who's possibly getting written up in the waffle. I can't remember who, but so yeah, there's a few that might be a bit like that, unfortunately, this week. But just goes to remind you, you've got to be very fair when you go down the lower levels. Lower levels. I know a lot of young players get excited; they want to impose their medal to try and get into the main squad. But yeah, you just got to be a bit careful there.
Yeah. I just want to quickly, just before we move on to the next game, I want to quickly just jump back to Thursday night's ANZAC Appeal game because the Rising Star was announced, and it is Xavier Lindsay of Melbourne. He collected 21 disposals, 11 marks, and had 5 score involvements from 70% game time in the match. And obviously he had some really. He also got the nod in round 1 against GWS, where he collected 22 touches and also had 20 touches against North in round 2. So overall, he's been having, apart from having a brief knee injury, like round 3, round 4, he's been extremely solid for Melbourne so far this season.
I will say Melbourne actually probably missed him in that period because, yeah, as I said, he's not consistently providing. Well, I mean, his disposal is okay, but you know what I mean. Like he's a bit of a burst player from the outside, but comparative to some of the players around him, he actually generated a bit more movement from there. So I think even internally, he's probably going to be rated fairly highly in terms of consistent performers for Melbourne so far this year.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's jump over to our next Saturday game. One that I don't know how you really felt about this one, but it's the Port Adelaide versus North Melbourne game at Adelaide Oval.
I called it a blurst of contest. I think neither team will be very happy about how it played out. I was absolutely spewing about some of the undisciplined errors and free kicks given away by Port Adelaide, and counting my lucky stars that, unfortunately, North weren't actually able to fully convert. Like, the final scoreline was 14-13, 97 to 13-10, 88. but it feels like this should have been like a 8:20 to like 6:35 game. By the whole tone. Port did dominate in the first quarter, and it felt like they were just going to run away with it. Very, very good at stoppage. North were just letting the ball come in way too easily to their defense. But after that, it was sort of a mixed bag, really, because I don't think disposal and transition ever got good in this match. North didn't need a transition because they got a lot of score of 50-meter penalties. And, you know, so some of the players, like, you know, Port's midfield, they were all right. North got back in the second, and it really didn't help that Vaughan, Francis, and Sweet gave away 9 free kicks all up. It was a very mixed bag umpiring affair, but, you know, as I said,
Oh, you're
I
telling
think
me.
North Melbourne scored, I think it was either 3 or 4 goals from 50-meter penalties. And I think about 9 goals up from free kicks. So, you know what I mean? Like, they weren't scoring well, okay? Like, well, I should say Paul Curtis was absolutely fantastic on fire. And Larky, positionally wise, absolutely tore up Port's defense. It's just, yeah, Larky just dropped marks. He was butchering shot on goals. It was a rare moment where he was actually getting plenty of opportunity to shine. It just, he had his one off game. And I think if he converted true, I think actually North win this. And I really don't want to blame him. But I think this just sort of shows where North at, where like they need things to sync up to get their wins.
Yeah.
And I know that's a bit for every team, but you know what I mean? Like they needed Port to play really badly. They needed their midfield to step up a tiny bit. And they needed to convert a bit truer than they did. You know, it's like a lot of good teams, like they only need one of those things to get their chances. And I know it was still a close game, but you know what I mean? It was like, yeah, I think North fans were just a bit upset that they couldn't get a win out of this one. So yeah, it's a really mixed bag for them. I don't think they should be too down on themselves. I think they did lift in some areas that they needed to lift. But at the same time, it's just one that's gone a bit begging for them. And yeah, they just really need to get wins on the board at the current moment. Couldn't really afford to let it slip. Port really lucky, but you know, it's just the way it is.
Yeah, like there isn't super much you can really say about this one. Like I think Port pretty much got by the skin of their teeth and should be very thankful that they managed to pull it off. Because yeah, if North had won this one, I can only imagine how Alberton Oval was going to look on Sunday.
Oh, you're telling me. Like I was a bit half and half, so I listened to the radio call before I got home and was able to watch it on TV. And you know, I was just spewing because it's a typical Port game where player by player, ground by ground, systematically, like they weren't doing that badly. And they, again, when they were dominating, they probably should have scored a bit more than they actually did. In the second quarter, they had good chances to give it away, but like there was one, Sam Pepper in the goal square, kicking it into the man on the mark from about 10 meters out.
Yep, I did see that.
Sort of set the tone. And well, it's pretty funny, you should. And Mitch Georgiadis, I think it was a mark on top of the goal square, goes around to snap it in and just hits the belly of the ball. I think it stayed in the contest, but it turned out into
I saw that one as well.
Exit 50.
We love a good clanger sometimes.
Yeah, but you know what I mean? Like, I felt like if they converted either of those two, they steady a bit, but, you know, and again, the umpiring was very hit or miss. Like, they had a bit of the rough thing in the second, and, you know, like, it felt like that tone creeping in, like, Port were just ready to bottle it. They really could have been a lot more disciplined. I know, you know, a lot said about, like, Jason Horne-Francis, getting a bit hot-headed, and, you know, I actually think this was one of the times where Butters and Rosie actually did the best they could stepping up, you know, like they got in to take a step back without taking away from his natural game, you know, like the way he was able to. Like, he shouldn't be having to go at umpires. And like, I'm not sure if you saw the fines. Like, I would be very surprised if he wasn't fined. Yeah, he got fined for instigating Miller. He probably should have got fined for the way he was talking to the umpire at 3/4 time. I don't think that's a good look for the league, but
no.
You know what I mean? It's just like, it's just the tone for the game. Like, Port made it hard for themselves, even though player by player, they still had enough players firing. Like, this could have been like a back and forth contest where, a few North players were playing fairly well, keeping into it, but like Port being the better team, just getting on top of them, which I still think like overall Port were better. But like North did enough, which was a good thing. It's just, as I said, they just couldn't convert. And it's like, I think, as I said, their forward half players were working a bit harder than their back half players. Port actually restrict them to a very paltry 48 marks, with I reckon about a fourth of them being taken in the forward half. So,
Yeah.
like, that's what I meant. Like, systematically, like, Port were doing good to restrict, but they just allowed such easy opportunities to where none of that mattered. So, as I said, it sucks for North, but, this is one where, like, Port could have really derailed their season with this. And I think they're very, wiping their brow, just looking for next week. Hopefully they're very quick to forget about it and maybe, just focus on the things you did right. Hope that doesn't happen again, sort of thing.
Yeah, I agree. To North's credit though, I think this is a game where they've shown that they are, still in that step in the right direction. It's just, it could have been a win on the board and just wasn't meant to be at this point in time.
Yeah.
But, again,
So who predicts Larky to have that bad of a game?
yeah, like
when he's doing all the right things.
literally. So I was watching Bounce last night, obviously Sunday nights, as we record this, and like he was commentating this game, and he kept praising Larky for being one of the best shots in the AFL, and each time he did it, Larky missed his shot.
You reckon a bit of conspiracy?
Maybe it was the Dunstall curse. It might have been the Dunstall curse.
Yeah, commentator's magnet, As soon as the commentators say it, you get that electromagnetic pulse to the behind. So, maybe that's what it is. But
it could have
just
been.
Seems like wins.
It could have
just
been.
hard to come by.
But yeah, no, I think North are showing that they are in the right direction. Unfortunate for Paul Curtis getting his 3-match ban. They are going to the tribunal to appeal. We will find out the outcome of that later in the week. But otherwise, like, provided they have their players, I think they can still at least put up a decent fight against a lot of these teams.
Yeah, it's just, I think the biggest thing for North fans is that should already be where they're at.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? It just seems now they're like sort of still waiting for these sort of opportunities where opponents sort of hand them, like, they got the job done against Melbourne. Like, they shouldn't ever be not congratulated for that. But, it almost feels like they're waiting for the weaker oppositions to come rather than flexing when they have the opportunity. They've got to be a bit less vulture, a bit more attack animal.
Yeah, 100%. Let's jump over to our individuals. Zach Butters was immense in the midfield. Wasn't as hot-headed as he normally is. He was very composed this week because he let Jason Norton-Francis do all the hot-headed work. But he finished with 27 disposals, 21 effective, equating to 77.8% efficiency, 13 contested possessions, 4 intercepts, 4 inside 50s, 5 clearances, 7 score involvements, 13 tackles, 30 pressure acts, and 11 ground ball gets. Darcy Burn-Jones was leading goal kicker for Port. He kicked 3 goals from 13 touches, 3 contested possessions, 5 marks, with 2 of them being inside 50, 4 inside 50s, 7 score involvements, and 10 pressure acts. Veteran Ollie Wines still putting in the good work as he loves to do. Words are hard. He collected 24 disposals, 12 contested possessions, 6 intercepts, 4 inside 50s, 7 clearances, 2 behinds, 2 goal assists, 7 score involvements, 4 tackles, and 21 pressure acts. Jumping over to North Melbourne, Tristan Sherry got the best of Jordan Sweet. You were kind of talking about this earlier, how Jordan Sweet kind of had a little bit of a rough game. So Sherry finished with 39 hitouts, 14 to advantage, and a goal. He kicked a goal. Good on him. From 23 touches, 16 contested possessions, equating to 69.6% efficiency, 18 contested possessions. Oh, sorry, I meant 16 effective possessions. Mind me. 18 contested possessions, 5 intercepts, 7 clearances, 6 score involvements, 14 pressure acts, and 7 ground ball gets. And then veteran Luke Parker in his 300th game. He did the best to keep the Roos in it. He kicked 1-1 from 27 touches, 12 contested possessions, 4 marks, with 2 of them being inside 50, 5 score involvements, 4 tackles, and 7 ground ball gets.
Yeah, I was trying to forget, like, because Travis Boak didn't play, um, there was going to be a weird stat where it's going to be like the first player to play someone in their 300th game and something else. But yeah, as I said, so he sort of misses out. Obviously with not playing this game with his back issue that takes him out for I think it's a few months. That sort of happened during the week. So
Or
um, yeah. So
that puts a
if you're
hamper
wondering why he didn't.
on potential plans for him to play one more season just to hit 400.
Yeah, well, hopefully it's a long going, but as I said, your body is the way it is when you get to that age. I say your tank still is fine, but injuries just get a bit longer when you get a bit old in the tooth.
Yep, it's an unfortunate reality of life. Onto the injury front, Josh Sin suffered a concussion due to the quote unquote dangerous tackle, which North Melbourne is appealing because it's the Paul Curtis tackle, which is why he's been suspended for 3 matches. So jumping over to the MRO, that is the first one. Mitch Georgiadis was fined $2,000 for tripping Dylan Stevens. Jazz Simpkin was fined $1,000 for instigating a melee, and Jason Horn-Francis, as you touched on, was fined $1,875 for instigating a melee.
Yeah, and on the Paul Curtis one, I think it's one of those things where I don't think it's going to change, but I think it's a bit unlucky because it's one of those ones where I think just in the way momentum works, Josh Sin did go to grab easily. Like, I'm not saying he flopped or anything because no one wants to get dumped like that, but it's just your legs get taken a bit quicker, and he didn't have enough time to turn the body.
Yeah, it was an
and that's probably
entirely
what they've been
momentum-based tackle. It was literally an AFL sort of act. It wasn't like a player act. It was just the way the game was.
Yeah. But you know what I mean? It's like you're expecting to get something just for like, all reckless and, as I said, just to keep the standard of getting punished if you perform a tackle and the player gets injured, as I said.
Yeah, I don't.
That would be a very interesting one. I think it's got just as much chance to stay and a fair chance to just go down to 1 week. But I couldn't see any other results happening.
I don't really want to go on a huge tangent about the whole system because we've talked about it at length in the past about how it's a very outcome based system, not necessarily action based. I should say whatever whatever the thing was that caused the player to get suspended. But it's an AFL act. It was a full momentum based tackle. It was nothing malice or anything like that in it. It's just rough.
Yeah, exactly. As I said, technique. You can have a clumsy technique and be lucky and get away scot-free, and you can have 90% good technique, like in this instance, and, get done for a pretty heavy stint of time.
Yeah. All right, let's jump over to our Canberra game. These happen, every month or a month and a bit. It's the Giants taking on the Bulldogs up in Canberra.
Yeah, I'm a bit filthy with myself. Again, I think I gassed up the Bulldogs' chances a bit in the previews. I sort of also saw that, in the Canberra thing, but I was like, I'm probably gonna like tip one against the Giants or against Gold Coast. I was gonna tip the other team, but I stuck with them both, and I was like, yeah, I really should have gone Bulldogs because they really, really responded. Responded. The Giants failed to respond, is what I was trying to say, to a Bulldog team that, despite injury, has looked very solid and possibly even refreshed. Now that they've got Captain Bomb back into their side, there's a bit of a touch and go thing for this week, but we'll talk about that a bit later.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, they did set up their back half movement in this game. One of like their biggest strengths for the Giants. But the Bulldogs really just didn't let the Giants dictate their forward half game. They beat them soundly, as they would any other team in like a contest that was pretty much settled in a pretty brutal third quarter domination. Despite some strong forwards for both teams, it was really the solid defensive efforts on man-ups that sort of left a lot of the scoring to be on ground level,
Mm-hmm.
and in which case the Bulldogs were far more accurate. They had a lot more players that were able to convert. And the Bulldogs were also just more efficient in an area that matters, and that's score impact from midfield core. And they essentially bullied a centre team that sort of likes to be restrictive in that area. They don't like letting teams score from the stoppages or centre clearances. Normally, the Giants, probably a bit more so last year, but even this year. And that's where the Bulldogs were just business as usual. It was very, very strong performance in the forward half of the game. And I think the Giants will just be a bit concerned that they're not able to restrict teams like they used to, other years where, they've faced forward half teams.
Yeah, exactly
yeah.
right. And the fact that the Dogs were able to just get such a lead pretty much like right away. And granted, Giants definitely tried to keep it close, but the Dogs just overwhelmed them so well. Like a 32-point win is not, I wouldn't say insane, because Bulldogs do have a good track record up in Canberra. But against the Giants, who are looking like a very solid top 4 potential team, and I do use potential like loosely. It's still early season.
I pulled on it a tiny bit, but I still believe that it's definitely top half of the ladder.
Yeah, like genuinely, the way these two teams have been tracking so far this season, especially now that the Dogs look so much more refreshed, like we could see another round of this again in finals like we did last season.
Yeah, exactly. But I will say, to your point, that's the other thing about 30 points. It's like, say what you will about the Giants, they don't always look good, but they don't tend to get smashed. And I know it wasn't so much on the scoreboard, but I feel like they did get smashed this match. So, you know what I mean? To be able to muscle up against the Giants is full credit to the Bulldogs, who, again, haven't had all their options available to them.
Yeah, and they're still missing a couple of players as well. Like, not just Sam Darcy, who only just went down. Like, they're still missing Treloar through the midfield. They're missing 1 or 2 in defense again. Like, but they're still able to.
Waitman.
Oh yeah, still missing Brady
Jones.
Waitman.
I think they actually dropped Jones.
They did drop Jones.
Sure.
It was questionable by Bevo, but you know we have seen a solid outcome this week, so can't question it too much. But yeah, like the fact that they're still not even at full strength, they're able to still take it to teams that are considered top 8, pushing top 4, is impressive.
Yeah, and I will say, like, this is something I've talked about the Giants. Just like a final bit for them, because again, I'm not going to go too deep into this game. But I think you could also see some of the difference, in the style of these two teams, about finding goals when both their defenses were set up. Because, didn't really let the bigs have too much impact. Hogan and Riccardi were good early, but they sort of got restricted. But all the times, GWS just weren't creative, trying to find targets in their forward line. I thought Darcy Jones was by far and away the most creative player. His year's speed to break up the games. He was looking to link up a lot. But yeah, that was pretty much it. Whereas the Bulldogs, they utilized a lot of like higher forward half of the 50. I wouldn't call it transition, but they just utilized that area a lot better. Opened up a lot more avenues for goals. So if the Lobster wasn't on, he had to play forward this week. They did find options like Harmel West on the run or breaking from stoppage. And, it sort of felt like one team was playing in a phone box while the other was playing in a paddock. The Giants' defense had to stretch a lot more. And while it felt like they were threatening, they just, having that stretch, made Bulldogs get more from their entries than the Giants were able to. Even though, relatively speaking, it was pretty even on that front in terms of like set shots and inside 50 differential. There wasn't that much between them.
Yeah, no, like the stats for the most part say it was close, but just around the ground you can see just how much of an impact the Doggies were having compared to the Giants, and how much more they were better to control the ground.
The Bulldogs were threatening, where I feel like the Giants were trying to find a lot more. And as I said, it just wasn't really, happening to them. Oh, sorry, the inside 50 is well lopsided. I should say that. And that's where
true.
the Giants did do well in defense.
That is true.
With 60-45. I was looking at stuff like forward half marks and all that.
I
But yeah, as I said, so GWS, they were defending well, but again, they weren't getting a lot from halfback. And
yeah, it was primarily their fullback.
they were getting.
It was primarily their fullback trio that were kind of doing a lot of the heavy lifting in defense.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, as I said, they weren't doing enough to escape the Bulldogs forward half trap. And we know the Bulldogs. It's like they're not the biggest dimensional team, but they do the one thing they do really well. Like, I won't say it's almost at Brisbane levels, but it's probably around there. Like, if you're going at teams going at their best, I'll put them behind Brisbane in terms of setting up a forward half game.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Jumping over to our individuals, James Harms, as you did briefly mention, he was very lethal up forward. He kicked 4 goals from 22 disposals, 18 of them effective, equating to 81.8% efficiency, 8 contested possessions, 4 intercepts, 9 score involvements, 15 pressure acts, 4 1%ers, and 7 ground ball gets. I didn't mention him, but mentioned to Riley West, as you also mentioned, he kicked 3 goals. Very solid for him this week. Debutant Jed Bustlinger. How many buses does he sling? Do you know?
I don't know. A lot.
I guess it's a lot.
He's that strong in defense.
Oh, for sure. He performed very well for a debutant. Finishing with 12 touches, 10 effective, equating to 83.3% efficiency, 5 intercepts, 4 marks, 2 score involvements, 7 pressure acts, 7 1%ers, and 7 spoils. Tim English was very solid around the ground this week. He got 34 hitouts, 5 to advantage, and a goal from 23 disposals, 19 effective, equating to 82.6% efficiency. 11 contested possessions, 8 marks, 4 inside 50s, 7 clearances, 7 score involvements, and 7 pressure acts. For the Giants, Tom Green was immense through the midfield. He kicked a goal from 27 touches, 19 effective, equating to 70.4% efficiency, 13 contested possessions, 4 inside 50s, 7 clearances, 7 score involvements, 24 pressure acts, 10 grab ball gets, 352 meters gained. And then Sam Taylor, as I did mention, was kind of their callback 3, did a lot of the heavy lifting in their defense. Finished with 16 disposals, 15 effective, equating to 93.8% efficiency, 8 contested possessions, 7 intercepts, 7 marks, 10 1%ers, 4 ground ball gets, and 7 spoils.
Yeah, and it should also note, although he was subbed off the first, what was it, about 3/4 time? He was subbed out. Bontempelli had a very complete game. 4 score launches, 10 score involvements, 20 pressure acts, and 22 disposals. I'm hoping they just put him on ice because, again, another fantastic game for not even a full game of football. So,
sorry, yeah, no, that's exactly right. And like the fact that he was subbed out and still had was putting up immense numbers. Like, I know, like, they are kind of managing him a little bit because, again, he did only just come back from injury. Just got to make sure that he's all right, that he's still, able to, like, keep up despite that injury. That's insane that he's able to just put those numbers up. There was...
It's also good. Oh, sorry, I was going to say, it's also good, too, because, like, they had the option to sub him off because, like, Matt Kennedy, Joel Freer, like, at the start of the season, like, well, Joel Freer wasn't even in the CBA mix, but, like, you would say at best 3rd and 4th options, but 26 and 27 disposals and a chunk of clearances. Like, how good is it to get that output from not even your core midfield unit?
Kennedy's effectiveness at the Doggies is basically what McRae is doing at St Kilda. Like, they're both having stellar midfield seasons, and it's and the fact that they're both brand new to the club systems and are still having such insane outputs, like, that's just the credit to, like, how hard they train, how hard they work, and like it proves that it doesn't matter how incredible the players around you are. Like, you can still be putting up insane numbers of your own even when you have Bontempelli by your side.
Exactly, you know what I mean? Like, if you do your role and you do the work, because, as I said, and doesn't matter where you're going from. Again, Matt Kennedy, 3rd club player, technically playing against his old team. If you
go back that far, that's
he
true.
started with the Giants, and Joel Freer again, a year and a half ago, he wasn't even playing football. So, oh, year and actually, yeah, he only got picked up in the mid-season. So,
Yeah,
last year.
that's correct.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
what a great pickup for the Dogs to see that he's come
Mm.
into solid fruition. There's no MRO, no injuries, thankfully. So let's jump over to our Sunday games, where the Gold Coast Suns took on the Sydney Swans up at People First Stadium.
Yeah, and as I said again, after the capitulation to the Tigers, wasn't a good week for Queensland last week. It did seem like the Suns early would lose to the run and carry that the Swans would sort of stunt. Um, sorry, that had the would stunt their excellent start to the season. That's what I was trying to say. As the Swans were looking to put in efforts to make sure the middle machine of Rout, Anderson, and Miller weren't going to get going. They were trying to limit their opportunities and assert the Suns' game plan. And prevent the Suns from asserting their game plan.
Yes.
Whilst their defense just sort of struggled to defend the high deep two-pronged threat that is Sydney, where they like to have enough threats deep to open up the high half-forward line where their midfields run into.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we saw Heaney have a good wander into the 50, get a few goals. And they were also converting very well when they did have that going. But even getting dominated that early around the ground, they had a 6-0 goal third quarter. Bit of a theme for this. And the Suns would actually go on to win comfortably. It was 17-15, 117 to 12-7, 79. And last year, we did question the sustainability of Sydney's attack. And in this game, we sort of saw the difference between, again, marking options inside 50. Sydney had to rely way too often on outside threats coming into their forward 50 to find a mark, which just makes shot generation harder. Whereas the Gold Coast had a really good mix of both still players coming from the outside, but their forward threats being much more potent and available. Again, Sydney haven't got all their options. But you know what I mean? It was just a lot more clinical by the Suns, and it seemed like a lot more consistent. So, whilst they have good efforts in their midfield, they just aren't converting as well as they did last year, as teams just expose their up and down defense that wobbles between just flaky and okay. And when, the Swans are finding it a bit harder to score this year, they're not affording to, have that defensive liability. It's getting exposed more often in games. And, for such a defensive-minded team last year for the Swans, like, the Suns acted almost unaware once they got their game going. It was just business as usual. They sort of just waited through the time that the Swans were pressuring them a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, they just sort of like, yep, we got them buckling. Let's just blaze the ball forward, expose that defense. And they just had the confidence they can get through this match because, like, this is a game where I think in other years, like, initially they might have buckled after that early pressure. They might have just, started getting a bit panicky, chipped the ball forward, blaze the ball a bit forward, not find that good forward connection. But, like, even some of the young players, like Bailey Humphries, how good was he at just positioning himself to either being the threat or distributing to the threat?
Yeah,
Because he tore the game apart.
phenomenal for a
They
young
had
player.
no matchup for him.
And like,
yeah, no.
The fact that the Swans were at least able to play their sort of game a little bit more in that first half. The fact that the Suns responded so well in that third quarter and just continued to just mount some immense pressure and some really solid defensive efforts pretty much all the way through to the end of the game is a credit not just to Dimmer and the coaching staff, but just to the players and the fact that they're able to just completely quell Sydney's efforts, despite the Lizard Nick Blakey pushing up forward in the fourth quarter and kicking 3 goals that kind of out of nowhere. That's it's incredible just that the Suns have been able to adapt so quickly now and to become such a threat to a lot of these teams.
Yeah. I think the flip side for that, like as you said, with like Nick Blakey scoring 3 goals and like redeeming it, it's like they have had to find their forward options out of nowhere. Like last week it was Aaron Francis randomly.
Mm.
Earlier on it was Amadi getting on to a bit of a run that we don't often see. Um, so it just feels a bit streaky. And I don't think the Sydney Swans have a good enough defence to have a streaky forward line. So they just need to find a way to get those tall marking targets, getting a few more goals per game, and then it'll get a nice synergy with the goals that they're able to get from the midfield.
Yeah, and I think they're also still very much missing Papley and his forward pressure because they don't have enough
Mm.
of it right now to where they're getting enough scores from inside 50, as simple as that, really. Like at least off
Yeah,
for like
pretty
from like
much.
off ground. Because like yeah, you can take marks and like still win in the air, but the fact that like Papley brings a lot of your forward pressure, you kind of need to
Mm.
try and fill that sort of void, and they're currently struggling to deal with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, like both teams had plenty of inside 50s. Like they didn't have much trouble getting it in there. As I said, it's just the Suns looked like a team that had their offensive setup going. And again, like it's almost like St Kilda. Sometimes the Swans look a bit opportunistic. Um, as I said, they generated what is it, like 7 less shots from only 3 less inside 50s. So yeah, it's just consistency for the Swans and obviously their defense, which was probably suspect last year, but got protected a bit more by up the ground stuff that is now getting a bit more week by week exposed.
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty much it. Jumping over to our individuals, as you mentioned, youngster Bailey Humphrey was stellar all day. Personally, probably best on ground for me, I think. He kicked 4 goals, one from 18 disposals, 15 of them effective, equating to 83.3% efficiency, 13 contested possessions, 4 marks, 5 inside 50s, 5 clearances, 11 score involvements, 4 tackles, 17 pressure acts, 8 ground ball gets, and 405 meters gained. Matt Rowell, as per usual, was an absolute pressure machine. He kicked a goal from 16 touches, 8 contested possessions, 6 inside 50s, 5 clearances, 7 score involvements, 8 tackles, 23 pressure acts, and 5 ground ball gets. And then Jared Witts, he got the better of Brody Grundy in the ruck and around the ground. He got 28 hitouts, 13 of them to advantage, and 18 disposals, 13 of them effective, equating to 72.2% efficiency, 10 contested possessions, 6 clearances are behind, 11 score involvements, and 9 pressure acts. For Sydney, Chad Warner ran well, especially in that first half. He kicked 2 goals from 24 touches, 8 contested possessions, 5 marks, 6 inside 50s, 6 clearances, 7 score involvements, 6 tackles, 19 pressure acts, and 690 meters gained. And then Nick Blakey, the Lizard, he was pushed up forward in the fourth quarter to great usage. As we mentioned, kicked 3 goals, but also finished with 17 disposals, 14 effective, equating to 82.4% efficiency, 4 contested possessions, 4 intercepts, 5 marks, 4 score involvements. Um, yeah, it's just, there's not much more that we can really say on that front. It's just consistency for Sydney. Injury front, it'd be nice to have Golden back, it'd be nice to have Papley back, but
Mm.
you got to try and fill the holes. Otherwise, you're just going to keep getting beaten by these teams who are just
Yeah.
improving before you are.
And just, to segue into the injuries, they lose a lot of the backmen in Ben Patton with a calf.
Mm.
If that's a few week injury, like we saw, the small in Humphrey get off the chain. So again, that's going to worsen their ability to stop link up play in opposition forward half.
Yeah, it's extremely rough for them, and you want to hope that they finally decided to put McCartan back in defense for good, so they at least have that more solid defender once
Mm.
more. But how long that is going to last, and whether they're going to be able to kind of keep the holes in check in their defense, is remains to be seen at this point
Mm.
in time.
Yeah, and it's like, but honestly, yeah, as I said, you say it's on McCartney defense, but it seems a bit more than that at the moment. Like, as I said, that's what I'm saying. Is like, I didn't think they had the defensive structure to be putting Tom McCartney in the forward line. And you know what I mean? It's like, I just don't think they're set at the moment. Um, so maybe, as I said, they just stumble to the bye, reassess. But it does feel like there needs to be some sort of reset in that
Yeah,
back line. It's very
and if their injury
suspect.
list continues to grow, they might have to try and dig into the mid-season draft to see where they can see if they can muster a defender
Yeah,
or another
exactly.
forward.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think they probably have enough in the forward line. It's just they don't utilize them to
Oh
the
well,
best degree. But
that's very much true.
yeah.
All right, jumping over to the next Sunday game held at the MCG. It is Carlton and Geelong. And a
Mm.
funny story about this before we get started is I was out with some friends playing Pokemon Go, as I mentioned earlier at the start of the episode. We found our way to Alexandra Gardens, where the Sydney Mime Music Bowl is, where they where they hold carols by candlelight each year. Um, so we were sitting up on the top of the hill, and I could see the MCG scoreboard from there. So I was just casually
Mm.
watching the game.
Nice,
So
nice.
it was a great time.
MCG security, please don't arrest Blazy next time he's down there.
Yeah,
He will
you
pay for
try
his
and
ticket
arrest
next
me
time.
from like 400 meters away. Good luck.
Yeah, okay. But
But yeah, it was
honestly,
crazy game.
and you would have been a bit surprised by the result. And I think defenders around the AFL universe might be a bit more nervous when they meet the Blues, as we saw sort of a tall revival
Mm.
from a often struggling forward line this year, and it helped get them over the edge against a pretty disappointing Cats outfit, who let their numerous turnovers result in easy goal movement and goals against. Uh, Not too surprising, as they are normally all year. Geelong were very, very strong at ground level, while the Blues sort of chose their kick mark game, especially in their back line. But with so little marks on lead in the entire game, it was really the contested and uncontested marking around the ground of Carlton
Mm-hmm.
that got them an advantage in time in forward half, which they used to get more inside 50s until they could just find that set shot. Despite scoring very little from general play, the Carlton's forwards still apply great tackling pressure, out tackling their respective in their respective inside 50s, 12-4.
Mm-hmm.
So while Geelong did come back a bit late, uh, with a bit more time of possession in hand, which you tend to get late in the contest, play becomes a bit more free flowing. It was really nice kicking by Carlton that sort of steadied up the game for them nicely. And, despite an easy run of games that they had beforehand, they probably showed that they had legitimate growth in their game plan. And, despite struggling early in the season, it was fairly mature. It was almost Carlton like not coughing up that lead.
I mean, well, for once, they finally have both of their tolls back. Granted, would have had both of them back last week if Mackay wasn't out with concussion. So it's
Yeah.
like
Well,
the
probably both of them back playing decently.
yeah, and the fact that I think the Voss has finally figured out where he wants both of them to play, with seemingly Mackay playing a lot more up the ground, with
Mm.
Kerno playing more deep forward, being that tall marking option deep forward primarily. Like that's the sort of structure that they probably should have been trying to have the entire time, really.
Yeah. Well,
Utilizing a floating tall who is a little bit more fitter
yeah.
than the other one. And
Mm. And you're exactly right. Like, as I said, going back to like playing in a phone box to like spreading out defenses, as I said, Carlton's got that ability to stretch defenses so thin
hmm,
with, having two capable running forward. But all the time, like, they just let defenders swarm contests because they're marking so near together. And, as I said, that stretch is very important in an offense.
yeah, there's a lot of teams that really like to play in packs. But if you were able to
Mm.
stretch them out, stretch their defenses apart, you can easily weave your way through it. And I think Melbourne, just to go back on the Anzac Eve game, I think Melbourne play very similarly, where they love to defensively play in packs. But if you're able to
Mm.
stretch them out, you can get through their defense fairly solidly. Granted, they only had Stephen May and Max Gawn to really be those tall key defenders in those
Mm.
situations. Whereas for Carlton, they have two key tall forwards who can take insanely good marks at any sort of elevation,
Mm.
it seems like. So being able to get those one-on-ones and split those packs up is an immensely good tactic, and it's one that I hope they keep utilizing because they looked good. They looked really good.
Yeah, and as I said, it's very good to see some more creativity because I had that in moments last year, as I said, when they didn't have him. So it's sort of ironic that they're almost seeming more creatively now they have them back. It's a bit weird, but I think Carlton fans will be very happy
Oh yeah,
with
absolutely.
what they saw in terms of offensive production.
Especially considering they're
Um,
playing against the team, who's kind of always been touted to be this top eight, potentially top
mm,
four sort of powerhouse.
yeah,
It's it's
I
so
still believe in the Cats.
especially where Carlton started being what 0 and
Mm,
4, 0 and 5,
yeah, yeah, I was four, I think.
or 0 and 4 and up until gather round.
Mm,
To knock off Geelong when Geelong were already in some pretty solid form. That's such a good look for them, and that's some huge momentum they can keep carrying. Considering this
mm,
is also their third win in a row.
yeah. And I do want to mention the Cats because, like, I think there's an obvious concern. And I think, we've been, like, surprised about the Cats. Like, they seem to be on fire and then they just randomly lose
Mm-hmm.
or seemingly randomly lose. And I always like to have a look at those sort of matches because sometimes you can see things and, sometimes you're playing a bit too much theory ball. So, like, if you're a Cats fan, don't try and, like, read too much into this. But honestly, I reckon they might just struggle with certain midfield matchups. And I think it's the ones with the slightly bigger bodies because we've talked about them before. Like, on paper, they're just an average midfield group. Like, you wouldn't select many individual players in, like, your normal best 22 if you're just creating a draft super team.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like even Patrick Dangerfield, he doesn't even play in the centre bounce as much anymore. But as I mentioned, they just do good at racking up the stoppages that they do get and converting that into forward 50 numbers. Like, when they win clearances, that normally results in a forward 50 entry.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but up against a midfield with free balls that get the ball very often, and not just that, they tend to break the tackle pressure that Geelong can apply. Like, they're a hard-working midfield, don't get me wrong. Like, Tom Atkins, one of the best pressure players in the league in terms of a
Probably
midfielder.
the best at this point in time.
Yeah,
I
well, as I
believe
said, I
he's
wouldn't
top
be
two
surprised if he's
in
winning
a
the
lot of the
tackle.
pressure metrics.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. But yeah, you're right. But you know what? Like, Carlton, which can break tackle pressure to create those handball chains. It almost seemed like there was not much they could do, with that sort of midfield setup. So, you know what I mean? Like, we've talked about it. Geelong, they're not a high possession team, but they do get territory.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I feel like in these sort of contests, they lose possession and the territory, and it just limits the ball getting forward. Which again for Geelong, it's a simple equation. Like they've got such a strong midfield, it's all about getting it in there. Um, so you know what I mean. Like I don't think it's something that's going to worry him too much for the season. It's just like a drop match here and there, but that's something that the coaches really got to work out for finals. Which again, I assume they make. Um, because you know what I mean. It's like they just can't afford like ball winning midfield groups to dominate them because there's going to be plenty that they reach into the finals, whether that be uh, the Brisbane or the Bulldogs or, maybe even Port Adelaide on a good day.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Assuming Port Adelaide's going to make it, I'm just throwing them in there
As
because
a Port Adelaide supporter, you're
I'm
always going
biased.
to make the assumption they're going to make it.
Oh, you always got to hope for, but they are a big body midfielder. Get smashed on ground level, but you know what I mean? Like,
Their tackling
there's
pressure
probably
is
more Port Adelaide
immense, and
have.
that's what you rate them on.
Yeah, tackling's pretty good, but you know what I mean. It's like the teams that are a bit better on ground level as well, like Carlton. So
Yeah.
um, yeah, as I said, so just something to think about. Maybe even more so for tipping, but overall, I'm not too concerned. It's just you start seeing in a longer season where the good teams might be struggling, and it's always interesting to see which teams patch that up when it comes to finals, and which team then tend to get exposed. Because we saw it with GWS last year, we saw it with Sydney in the grand final.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always interesting.
Yeah, it is. Jumping over to our individuals, Harry Mackay, as we did mention, back from his concussion injury, was absolutely lethal up the ground. He kicked 3 goals from 19 disposals, 16 of them effective, according to 84.2% efficiency, 10 contested possessions, 12 marks, with 5 of them contested and 3 of them inside 50, 8 score involvements, and 13 pressure acts. Recruit Nick Haynes was a lead in defence, finishing with 20 touches, 14 of them effective, equating to 70% efficiency, 5 contested possessions, 9 intercepts, 13 marks, 8 of them being intercept marks, 3 score involvements, 7 1%ers, 7 spoils, and 400 metres gained. And Tom de Koning went out against Reece Stanley, getting 39 hitouts, 13 to advantage, and a goal from 20 disposals, 14 of them effective, equating to 70% efficiency, 14 contested possessions, 5 clearances, 8 score involvements, 11 pressure acts, 4 1%ers, 3 spoils. Over to Geelong. Jeremy Cameron was accurate in front of goal. He kicked 4-2 from 14 touches, 7 contested possessions, 8 marks with 4 of them inside 50, 4 inside 50s, 9 score involvements, and 5 ground ball gets. And then Tom Atkins, as we mentioned, has absolutely lifted his game as a pressure machine. I think he's up 2 in terms of pressure and tackling. He collected 18 disposals, 14 of them effective, equating to 77.8% efficiency, 10 contested possessions, 5 clearances, 14 tackles, 37 pressure acts, and 8 ground ball gets. Also, a brief shout out to, I think it's Geelong's debutant, Oliver Wiltshire, Wiltshire, for those a little concerned about my pronunciation. 6 touches, 3 marks, 3 score involvements.
Yeah. So, again, it's one of those things where, I wouldn't be too worried if I was Geelong, because they just tend to lose these matches every time during the year. But for Carlton, this win means so much more for them. So, again, for the baggers, a lot of them are very happy. And you know what? The season, as much as it was doom and gloom, it's within their grasp to get back into it. They'll get players back. One major injury, of course, but it's a player that's normally a repeat offender in terms of soft tissue injuries. You'll mention in a second. But apart from that, their future perspective, it looks a bit better at Blue Bagger Land.
Oh, I hate to burst your bubble, but there was
That's what I was talking about.
There was an announcement earlier today about a second Carlton player suffering an injury during this game. I'm going to talk about the first one first, being Zach Williams, having a calf strain in the first quarter, I believe. He has a history of soft tissue injuries, so they're just keeping an eye on that. But Jack Silvani, someone who has had an incredible season so far in defense. Honestly, I think he's been playing better than Wiedering. He suffered a break in his hand against Geelong. I don't know what quarter he suffered it. It might have been in the fourth quarter. I don't know when he was sidelined in the match. But yeah, that's rough, and the timeline for it is currently unclear.
Yeah.
So he could be missing a fair amount of footy.
Yeah, that is a major bummer. Like, honestly, he's one of those players that it's hard not to root for him. Unless you have like a vendetta against his dad or something. But, as I said, he always tries his hard. He's just never been able to get a game going. So it seemed like he was stringing it together. But, that's very unfortunate.
It's extremely rough because, I genuinely think he's had his best season yet. Even better than his debut season. And his debut season was fairly solid.
Yeah. Well, he was important in that debut season, he's like contributing goals and all that. And like, it was really useful. You just thought he was going to be a part of their future. But just unable to get it going. It's a real shame.
Hopefully it doesn't sideline him for too long because Carlton's defense will definitely need him long term. So it's a wait and see. Hopefully, I imagine he'll probably miss all the games up until the bye if it's like if it's a major serious injury, which it seems like. But hopefully post bye he'll be able to come back. It's all good and should be hopefully very solid.
Yeah, it's just one of those injuries that tend to be TBA week by week.
I think he's got. I think he got scans on it today, being Monday, of course.
Yeah.
So we'll find out official news on that sometime this week, and hopefully we'll get a timeline. Jumping over to MRO because MRO reports are out for the Sunday games. George Hewitt was fined at $3,125 for, you guessed it, careless contact with an umpire. This is his 4th offence already this season. Lucky Fogarty was fined at $2,000 for tripping Max Holmes. Jack Silvani was also fined $1,000 for careless contact with an umpire, his 1st offence. Jeremy Cameron also fined $1,000 for careless contact with an umpire, also his 1st offence. And Adam Chera will will accept a 1-match ban for striking Jack Bowes. I didn't actually see the incident on this one,
Mm.
but I assume it's there if it's been graded 1 match. So, well, bad luck, essentially. Bad luck for the week.
Yeah, well, I mean, if he did it, it's not really bad. You know what I mean? But he's definitely a player that sort of improved a bit this year after having a very middle of the pack last year. Not so much as like Hewitt's set up in their midfield, but still being pretty solid for the most part. So I'll miss him next week.
Yeah, especially when like he's kind of had a history of the past couple of years of injuries. Like he's finally, been able to string some very solid games together the past, uh, probably past season and a bit. I think he played most of last season, off the top of my head. So
Relatively. I said he wasn't that impressive though.
no, yeah, he's kind of a little bit underrated in terms of like the kind of powerhouses that Carlton currently have in that midfield anyway.
Mm.
So it's not like he has to have a massive impact. But yeah, that's just is what it
Yeah.
is. You do the crime, you do the time. In this
Mhm.
case, all right. Jumping over to our last match of the round, held at Marvel Stadium. This one, it's Hawthorn's 1 match they have to host at Marvel. It is contracted for every Victorian club, and they're hosting the West Coast Eagles.
Yeah, you could tell why they put this on in this stadium. There is very little interest, and it was pretty much as by the book as you could be. Another straightforward loss for the Eagles. Again, they did try and maximize the most from their 50 inside 50s this match.
Mhm.
Their second best inside 50 count for the year. So it was good to actually see them generate a bit more. But it was a double-edged sword because, like, to be aggressive enough to produce the 74 points that they ended up getting this match, they produced enough turnovers for 22 scoring shots against, or to put that, 11-11 of Hawthorn score,
Mhm.
which was 18-16, 124, where the Eagles generated 11-8, 74, as I mentioned earlier. Hawks by 50, pretty simple contest. Honestly, I almost felt like, again, I watched the highlights of this game just because we were watching it at my granddad's house. He actually wanted to see the Eagles play it. He's got his own game, but he sometimes struggles with the remote, so
Oh
we
yeah.
just watched it with him. Um, yeah, so it was a bit interesting because, as I said, it just felt like the Hawks were just letting the play come to them. And, like they allowed enough pressure. Oh, sorry, they applied enough pressure to get their turnovers.
Mhm.
But once they happened, they just boink, boink, boink down the ground, get a goal again. Unfortunately, not that interesting or insightful. Did break their couple of game losing streaks, but yeah, one you can't really read too much into. Unfortunately, Eagles are just a bit down in terms of that. And, again, I didn't watch the match fully, so I'm just going to put up a bit of a brighter point for the Eagles. And that was like the middle part of the ground, the ruck battle, which was probably the most interesting matchup of the night. Lloyd Meek by far won comfortably. Most would say was a better player and maybe even the match MVP. But interestingly enough, like Matt Flynn, ended up with more ranking points, which is what Champion Data assigned to who they think is the best player by doing the best things at having in possession.
Mhm.
And it was probably due to the amount of score launches and score involvements made by him compared to the two ruckmen. Uh, both were prolific, but Flynn obviously being the higher percentage of his team score involvements and had a higher amount of hit out wins that went to advantage. So obviously, uh, Meek was more likely to win, but Flynn's hit outs that did win were more likely to go to a player. So again, I said earlier in the season, I thought there was little reason to play Flynn over Williams. But here we're starting to see a bit more advantage come from the ruck. Something that they haven't had since the Nick Nat and Vardy combo in maybe 2019, 2018 in their premiership season. So yeah, as I said, not much to say, but I think that was probably the biggest win of the night for the Eagles. So, you know, just something they can put their head on, but otherwise it was a pretty standard performance. Harley Reid had some okay moments. Still a bit mixed in the clearances, but Elijah Hewitt
Mhm.
got a bit, but yeah, apart from that, yeah, not much.
Yeah. I do very much highlight Lloyd Meek, as you mentioned, very much match MVP. But with the hitouts, that I will jump onto specific individuals in a moment, but I just want to mention his hitouts specifically. 58 hitouts is immense. 21 to advantage as well. That's insane. But he also beat the club's hitout record, previously held by Ben McAvoy, who
Mm,
only retired like not that long ago, actually, only a couple years ago, and he held the
mm,
record at 53 hitouts. So, and especially when considering Lloyd Meek isn't all that old either, like he's early to mid 20s.
mm.
Like that's insane work from him.
It's also a bit of a novelty too, because both the 1 and 2 hit out leaders, again, pinched from other clubs too.
That's true.
McAvoy being from St Kilda, Lloyd Meek originally being from Fremantle. So, you know what? Saints, sorry, not Saints, Hawthorn, a good club to go and ruck at the twilight end of your career, or the fledgling part of your career if you're Lloyd Meek.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Jumping over to the individuals now, though. Jack Gunston, he just continues to wind back the clock with his performances up forward. He kicked 4-2 from 14 disposals, 10 of them effective, equating to 71.4% efficiency, 5 contested possessions, 6 marks with 4 of them inside 50, 12 score involvements, and 10 pressure acts. I checked the Coleman medal list earlier today. He's sitting 8th currently, which is
Yeah.
insane, really.
And he hasn't started every match too, has he? He's been sub a couple.
Um, it's either been him or Bruce that have been most of the subs, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like he's kicked what? He kicked 4 this week. I think he kicked like 4 last week or 3 last week, and then 4 again the week
Yeah, he kicked it
before.
back against Port.
Yeah, so like he's putting in some.
I think it was 5 against Port.
Despite his age, like as we said with Sidebottom, they're still putting in the hard work. These older players.
Oh, the Hawks would be like, there would probably be a few goals behind winning if it wasn't for someone like Gunston. You know, we said there's forward lines a bit suspect in terms of player by player, but if you have a player like Gunston delivering enough, you know, like stats don't lie. They're kicking, well, they're getting enough points per match.
They are. Cam McKenzie was a pressure machine in the midfield. He finished with 20 touches, 10 contested possessions, 6 inside 50s, 4 clearances, 4 score involvements, 9 tackles, 26 pressure acts, 7 ground ball gets, 461 meters gained. And then Lloyd Meek, as we've already mentioned, 58 hitouts, 21 to advantage, and 19 disposals, 7 contested possessions, 3 marks, 4 inside 50s, 4 clearances, 11 score involvements, 4 tackles, 18 pressure acts, 3 1%ers, and 2 spoils. Jumping over to the Eagles, flying Liam Ryan. He looked competitive up forward. He kicked 3-1 from 7 disposals, 4 contested possessions, 4 score involvements, 6 tackles, 3 of them inside 50, and 24 pressure acts. And then Hartley Reid, as you did mention, he did step up a little bit more. As I mentioned earlier in the podcast, he was a little quiet in that first quarter, but once he got his game going, I thought he was fairly solid. He kicked 2 goals from 19 touches, 14 contested possessions, 7 clearances, 5 score involvements, 29 pressure acts, and 9 ground ball gets. Do we want to briefly talk about the move to put Oscar Allen in defense?
Oh, only in the brief sense that it's a bit, I'd just say hard because, you know, as I said, like I don't like to turn about too much the external bits of football in terms of, you know, just in general, but it does seem to maybe have a direct impact because he goes to his original position in defense and, you know, he matches up on Mubby or Chol. I didn't watch this game enough to know whether he was directly responsible for the 3-goal 2 he kicked, but you know what I mean? It just seemed to be a bit of a nothing move.
Yeah,
And, you know, you gotta wonder.
It's like a weird trial decision that normally it's something you would just try in like the
Yeah.
VFL or the Waffle in this case. But
Mm.
trying it in an official AFL match, I mean, that's a big risk already.
Well, he was a defender, like he was drafted as a defender. Like that was a move that happened after he was drafted. They just thought, you know, he was more what the Eagles needed because they just love forwards is make him into being another forward. But you know what I mean? It's just like, at what point are you just like trying things for the sake of trying things? And we've seen that a lot from the Eagles. So like, I don't want to read too much into it. And like, whether it was like a punishment to be sent to the Eagles back line, which is, you know, would scare anyone straight, I would think.
Yeah.
But yeah, as I said, it just, I don't know. It just doesn't quite pass the sniff test and it's a bit whatever. Like, you know, but at the end of the day, it's like, again, the Eagles forward line is actually functioning okay. So maybe it is the thing you run for a few weeks, see if it changes anything. But I wouldn't persist too long with it.
Well, I mean,
Like
every time we've
most
kind
of
of
3 weeks.
every time we've kind of looked at the Eagles forward line like really working effectively, it's always been with a singular tall forward, primarily with Waterman. So it's not the worst
Yeah.
idea to kind of shuffle a piece around or two, but whether
And
you
I
can
think
actually have an effect
too,
with it, that remains to be seen.
yeah. I think the problem is like a bulk of the Eagles forward line is like just uh Waterman and Ryan, and then a few people bobbing up here and there.
True.
Like Ryan's had a fantastic year back from injury. It's the first time he's had consistent games, and he has looked pretty electric
Mm.
for so little things. Again, like we talk about small forwards, like I was about to say Curtis Taylor. Um, what's his name for North Melbourne that just got suspended? Uh,
Paul Curtis.
Paul Curtis. You know what I mean? Like so we've seen how good he is with limited, but like Liam Ryan's even less, and he wouldn't be that far off goal production with him. So
Yeah, that's right.
you know, I just want to highlight that. So you can maybe see it that way. You don't want to be too negative, but it just does seem a bit. Yeah, it's questionable, but not like something I would just like. I'm not going to ask what is the name Minnie to be sacked over stuff like this. It's just
Not when
you
it's only
hope
been like
stuff.
7 games.
Yeah, you just hope the direction for the Eagles to put a competitive squad out there appears without having to do too much of these sort of moves.
Well, I mean,
Like you would want something to jealous.
despite the margin being 50 points, the fact that the Eagles still managed to hit over 70 is like, it's still a decent output. It's just not, not enough when the
Yeah.
Hawks kick
If you look at
124.
their inside 50s and their scoring profile, like again, they've scored efficiently. Again, it's sort of like North Melbourne last year. You know what I mean? Like they had so much efficiency in their forward line, they just had no way to get it in there.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? It only gets you so far. And with that
Yeah, it really
defense,
does.
North only won game against pretty low quality oppositions last year. So I think that's just sort of where they're at. But whether that also means there's a stepping stone, that's what you want to see. It's like, where's that stepping stone step going to come from?
Yeah, which is
And,
exactly.
they've got to work their position. They just want, in the last half of their season, setting these spots.
Yes.
So they can get some consistency.
Which is exactly what we've seen from North Melbourne against the Port game, is that, whilst they didn't get the win, they've made some decent progress in terms of the direction they want to go.
Yeah, exactly.
On the injury front, sadly, both Jack Scrimshaw and Carl Amon suffered concussions, so they will miss this week's game against Richmond, which might I have a couple of thoughts about that game. We'll talk about that in a moment. And then over on the MRO front, Liam Baker was fined $1,000 for quote unquote other misconduct against former teammate Mabior Chol. I don't know what exactly happened, but $1,000 is probably enough. And then Jack Ginnivan was fined $3,750 for kicking Jack Graham in the body. It was intentional, but graded as low impact, so just graded as a fine. Apparently, it's his second offense of kicking someone. I guess it's part of his hot-headed nature.
Maybe mineral.
So, if he gets a third one, I think it might genuinely be a match.
I think they've got rid of cumulative, but you could be right.
I know
There
the
might be
fines.
certain
I know the fines
offenses.
continue to equate, but I don't know how it goes for like how far it goes.
Again, it's just the way the MRA used to be.
Yeah.
Where fines could lead to a suspension. Again, my favourite got 1 week and they quickly changed that. So
yes,
yeah,
indeed
I'm not
they
sure
did.
if some of them, are still fixable.
All right, let's jump over
It might
to.
be 5.
It might have been that 5. I can't remember. Yeah. Anyway, let's jump over to the fixture for this week. Starting with a Thursday night, debatable if it's a blockbuster, but a Thursday night clash between Essendon and North Melbourne at Marvel Stadium.
If any match up against North or Essendon is going to result into a watchable game, it's probably like this one. You know what I mean? It's like two teams' defense isn't quite priority. Essendon probably got more outside ball movement. North probably have the ability to win on the inside.
Mhm.
North's forward line looks a bit more threatening, whereas Essendon probably a bit more rounded. I think this was a tough one. I can see North winning this, despite all I've said about them.
I don't
And I
know.
think this is a really big game.
I mean, they definitely have a sniff, but I think without Paul Curtis, it limits their opportunities up forward, and that might give Essendon more of an edge in that regard.
Essendon defend small a bit better than they do tall.
But then again,
They're
Essendon
exposable.
do also have Ben Mackay, who isn't exactly doing well at the moment, and Nicolaki is probably going to get the best of him. So
Yeah, I mean, I've completely forgotten. Do they still have Ridley going at the moment? Is he back?
I don't know.
I
I don't know if he's in or out injured. It feels like it keeps changing every week. I haven't actually checked.
Yeah, I can never keep track of Ridley, but I'll do a quick check because that is actually one of the big swings whether they had Ridley or not.
Yeah, if they have
Uh,
Ridley in, that will make a lot of the difference in their defense.
yeah, no, he's back last
Okay,
week.
good.
Um,
Essendon could actually have a bit more favour in that case. Um, but honestly, North could genuinely do have a sniff against this.
well, again, their midfield's got lift because again, I could see if Essendon put out the exact same performance as they did last week, their midfield's probably going to get bounced by the Kangaroos, pardon the pun. Todd Goldstein against his protege in Tristan Cherry.
Yeah.
Honestly, that's going to be tough for Cherry not to just dominate the ground. We've seen what you've given him with a bit of a sniff when he got on top of Sweet. So, yeah, there's a lot of avenues where I can see North winning. Again, I still think Essendon's more rounded, but I could see me getting burnt by tipping North again.
Do we call this the Ben Mackay Cup or the Todd Goldstein Cup?
The Ruck Cup.
The Ruck Cup, the Talls Cup, the Cup of the Talls.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't know. Who knows? The Mackay Mackay matchup.
No.
Oh yeah, okay.
That
yeah, I get you.
Ben Mackay used to play for North. Is the point
yeah, like the yeah, I get you, but I don't know. Yeah.
North. Yeah, I think honestly, I think you're right. And that North have a sniff, and if they capitalize on their midfield opportunities, they could easily overrun the Bombers. But I want to hope it's at least a good game. You want to hope it's at least a banger.
Yeah, no, as I said, I'm still not convinced about North, but you know what I mean? Like, of all the teams that I think they could be in a sniff with, I think this is a chance. And, if you want to maybe tip a sneaky one that other people don't tip, it's one that you might float North here.
Yeah, absolutely. Back to Marvel Stadium for the Friday night game between St Kilda and Fremantle.
Yeah, and honestly, Fremantle are randomly losing against St Kilda, but they have been fairly okay in recent times. Dispatched them, I can't say with relative ease last time, but they did get a lot of scoring against them.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at their match history, it was 8-7, 55 St Kilda to 9-18, 72 Fremantle. So yeah, it's that was away but Freo as well.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, look, Freo's tall forward line against the St Kilda's team that hasn't been defending tall all that well is pretty suspect. And I know Amos hasn't had a good year. Tracy's been relatively good, but a few down matches. But it's Freo too, they're good at stopping back half movement.
Mm-hmm.
So unless St Kilda pull a really big rabbit out of their hat, with their creative in the forward line, I think it's going to be really hard for them. This is actually one where I say I think Saints are a bit further out in the odds. Further out than what I think the odds suggest, and what maybe people might be thinking in the tipping. I think Freo really should get the job done here. The midfield's a lot more rounded. Both of the Saints outside movements a bit better, but once it gets into the back half, they've got the tolls to match up. Freo are okay on ground level, so unless there's a systematic breakdown in defense, I'm pretty confident in Freo here.
Yeah, I'm definitely more confident in Freo here. I think it's time to give him a little bit more credit. That they finally, been able to string some consistency together. especially in that midfield. And I think it's worthwhile to tip them against St Kilda here.
Yeah. I mean, look, consistency hard when you lose to like Melbourne one week and then have a solid performance against Adelaide. But I know what you mean.
True.
It's like there's just areas where Freo are good at, and like, yeah, they're defensively off a bit at the start of the year, but do I think that's enough to lose to St Kilda, who again aren't a conventional scoring team, so like defensive breakdowns might not matter as much anyway. Um, you know, Freo just have a lot of good areas to where I think they're just going to naturally capitalize.
Yeah, I agree. Jumping over to our first match on Saturday down in Ballarat, it's gonna be cold. Is the Bulldogs taking
Mm,
on Port Adelaide? And considering it is at Ballarat, a tiny ground that the Dogs
mm.
extremely favorable in, I would definitely have to give it to the Dogs on this one.
Yeah, but it's the interesting thing where Port have got the wood over the Bulldogs the last few times. 48 last year, 22 the year before that, Port by 14 the year before that. So recent encounters suggest that Port have a good sniff. And I think matchup wise, I think Port's one of those teams where, because the Bulldogs, like, they're not as big a ground ball team. Like, they do have a few good players that get them, but they're not week by week going to dominate.
Mm.
It's really just winning the clearances, and Port are a team that can actually match up well against that. Do I think that Port Western Bulldogs have probably evolved to actually cover up their flaws and like, you know, beat Port in areas where they haven't actually? I'll say probably. I think Port like are a sniff here for a sneaky upset, but like you're really looking at the Bulldogs.
Mm.
The way they've improved, they're a bit more rounded, even in the back half where they haven't been that great. Port do have a chance to like limit the damage from the Bulldogs' entries. But there's nothing to say Port's going to capitalize from their entries at the same time. So it's like, if push comes to shove and the Bulldogs get their game going, I think they're probably going to win. But, as I said, it's just up to them not to get torn apart like they have the last few times against Port.
Yeah, I agree. I think it very much going to depend on that midfield battle. Like the
Mm,
matchups with the Bont and Kennedy and Liberatore up against and Tim English for that fact as well up against Jordan Sweet,
mm,
and then obviously Butters and Rosie. Like that's going to be an insane matchup, and the pressure is going to be immense on
mm.
both sides as to whether they're able to break through and get those clean clearances out of the way.
Yeah. Well, Rosie's playing off halfback now, so you're actually looking at Butters, Horn
Ah,
Francis,
yeah, that's right.
Wines, um, what's his name? The Blood Nut. Um, sorry, Willem Drew. And occasionally Mead. You know what I mean? Like, Port just bat deep anyway. That's
Yeah,
why I think
true.
they match up well against the Bulldogs rotation, because, like, they're actually a lot more flexible in their matchups. So, I imagine, like, Willem Drew goes hard on Bontempelli, and they still got, like, enough outside winners to, like, still generate, which is why I think Port get a lot of the wood over the Bulldogs. It's just, like, I actually think some of the outside game might improve for the Bulldogs, and defensively, they've looked, I wouldn't say good this year, but like solid enough to where, it their forward line just always is tending to outscore teams,
Yeah.
except when they get injured to buggery.
Oh, yeah, that's very true. Jumping over to our next game over in Adelaide, it's Adelaide hosting Carlton, and now this could be a very interesting matchup.
Yeah, and it's like one of those things where it's very much season defining for both teams because, Adelaide, they could have really got their season going if they managed to get the win against Fremantle. Would have been a very solid away win, but you know what I mean? Like, they've got to stem it. And it's what I talked about before. If I'm right, and Adelaide also, struggle with, teams that put the pressure on, force those dump kicks, Carlton's going to be a bit of a bane for them because they've got that midfield that can really apply the pressure. Obviously, last year it was a very I thought they had two matches last year. Okay, so last year Adelaide pinched a very surprising win against Carlton last. I think it was just before they started to get their injuries last year, but it was a very entertaining match.
Ah, yes.
Um, But otherwise, yeah, again, Adelaide has got the wood over Carlton in recent times. But you know what I mean? It's just one of those things where if Carlton can control the centre consistently enough, get the ball forward. But I also think Adelaide have the tools to defend it. So I'm still backing in Adelaide. It's just, you wouldn't count off Carlton. And, I think it might be a bit of a trap tipping Carlton just off last week's performance. But there's part of me that's, still a bit wait and see for Adelaide. And they really can't afford to get trounced in the territory battle.
They also really can't afford to lose Silthorpe in this matchup either. So if he's
Yeah, well,
unable
that's
to
another
fully
one.
train and can't play this week, then their best options Tex, because Fogarty's out.
Yeah.
No, and if no Silthorpe, Tex is pretty much their best option. Oh, and I guess Keys as well. But again, Keys is smaller.
Yeah.
He's not super tall. So
And he's an opportunist. Like, he's the opportunist.
he is.
Like, one of the smartest in the league. Like, I don't want to take that away from his game. But he definitely increases in value when he's got people to bring the ball to ground around him. So
Agreed. But then again, like for Carlton's defense, losing Silvani, like that doesn't help them at all. So like
no.
Adelaide's forwards might, especially the smaller forwards, might have a little bit more favor, but we know Wiedering is probably going to play on Tex, and so it's going to be, it's going to be very dependent on those sorts of matchups as to where players like Keys can have the opportunistic impact that he often has.
Yeah. But as I said, also, it's like one of those things where, again, against Carlton, they haven't generated much from ground level. And we've said how Adelaide tolls tend to match up pretty well. So they could also just win from being defensively solid enough to. Like, Carlton's pretty defensively solid too. But again, it could just be a matter of feast or famine for their forward line. And, again, this will be the big test. And that's why I think it's an important game. But I'm going to say, like, slightly more avenues for Adelaide win than Carlton.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. I'm definitely leaning currently on Adelaide's side in that favor, but yeah, we'll wait and see on Thilthorpe as to whether that's a solidified tip for me. Jumping over to the MCG for Collingwood and Geelong.
I don't want to tip the Magpies, but they're going to make me.
Yeah, I don't really want to tip them either, but I think they're a pretty solid tip at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, again, what I mentioned before against, because I said, I don't think this is like a big body midfield, like I was saying, that might threaten Geelong early, but, those handball chains do lead to territory this year for Collingwood. Again, not the best kicks, but neither are Geelong. I think last year this was 17th versus 18th in terms of disposal efficiency by kick. So, Geelong did win that contest last year by 20, but again, Magpies just seemed a bit more rounded. So really, it's just how often will Geelong get inside 50 to where they can generate that game. Very limited last week. And on the flip side is when that does happen for Geelong, because they'll find their moments. They did even against Carlton, but, having their defence set up to prevent a lot of Geelong's attack. They've got okay matchups to do that. Whether it actually happens or not, Geelong are very inventive, even if they did have a bit of an off week last week. But yeah, as I said, it's hard not to go the Magpies at the moment. They're annoyingly good.
I'm glad you're officially on the train of not really liking them anymore.
I like some of the players.
Oh yeah, so do I.
Geelong's
Like I love Jack Crisp. He's just that good.
Yeah. Geelong, I just like to see them play more. Like, again, Collingwood's like a dirty handball team to simple goals. And while it is good, and, like Dacos's both will do good things during a game, like, I do love the Cats forward half attack. Like, I could watch that all day. But they're not a super team. There's limitations. I thought they were going to be top of the ladder this year. Might not be the case, but you know what I mean? It's like, if they just got their well forward every time, they would be literally unstoppable. But football very rarely works like that.
Yeah.
You're very
Very true.
you're getting restricted at certain times, and Collingwood's the sort of team that can restrict you.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think stamp of tick, or however we want to word that for Collingwood for this game. Jumping over to the West, where the Eagles host Melbourne.
I mean, they won last year.
True,
That's
they did surprise
uh,
Melbourne last year. They surprised everyone last year with
I
that.
think I think it was their first win for the year as well.
Uh,
Oh
yeah,
no,
c-
sorry, the Fremantle happened before.
yeah,
Sorry.
the Derby was first, and then they managed to string a second win in a row, and then fell apart.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, also the second match against Melbourne didn't go too well. So again, it's just a matter of how much Melbourne's midfield dominates to whether this is like a closest match or an absolute blowout. Um, Again, as you mentioned, like Melbourne, if they stretch out Eagles' defense, they can rack up a big score. Like even the last match where they got beaten out, they still kicked 10-10. That was the first match in 2024. So yeah, they're probably going to score against the Eagles. Their defense, again, Eagles just have to try when ball comes to ground. Melbourne structurally have been pretty good, but if they can like prevent intercept marks from happening, they might actually post a competitive score. But again, realistically, you're just not going to tip West Coast unless it's a really bad team, and there's not many really bad teams
Yeah,
in the competition at the moment. It's just West Coast and North that struggle to capitalize enough to set up winning positions.
yeah, I completely agree. Melbourne, this should be a convincing win for Melbourne, especially if they can get their midfields firing. For the Eagles, we just want to see, some good signs, some growth in the right direction. Whatever they decide to do with Oscar Allen, that have fun with it. If you feel comfortable putting him in defense, give him another go. He's gonna. I mean, who is he gonna match up against? Probably who am I thinking of?
Well, Harrison Petty,
Yeah,
if
it's
he
probably
plays forward.
Petty. Petty's likely going to play forward. That's why we've been putting him recently, especially because they don't really have many other options at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, if Aaron Roy's back, he could play him because he's a bit more athletic, but I think it's Petty. That sort of thing where it's like you need someone to match up on it, but you don't want to put your interceptor on him because you want him playing a bit more freely.
Mm-hmm.
So,
But yeah, overall, definitely a Melbourne tip in that regard. Jumping over to Sunday, where it's a banger match after banger match after banger match, starting with the Battle of the Bridge up in Sydney. Sydney Swans hosting at the SCG, of course, against the Giants.
this could be ugly.
Oh, this
Like,
could
I'm
definitely
excited
this
about the
could be
matchup
a
to see what.
this could be a scary bloodbath. I'm gonna be honest with you. With how Sydney have been looking,
Yeah.
it's not great.
Well, I mean, I'm not saying it's like ugly as in one team's going to dominate. I actually think the way the Giants play, that's not necessarily super fast. It's selectively fast.
Mm-hmm.
I think Sydney will actually enjoy that. Like they've been trying to restrict ball movement and then getting tired or beaten or losing matchups or whatever. But you know what I mean? Like the Giants that play so they've got like more time to set up those sort of defenses. And again, if the Giants get the ball into their forward line, it's pretty much over. Like I don't think the Giants forward line should have any problems with the Sydney's defense. But geez, the Giants muck around with it a bit, and that's where Sydney might find a few more options because you get the score from turnovers up. Sydney find a bit more loose contest. That's generally how they get their forwards into the game. Like conventionally, they're not the best one-on-one marks, but well, actually, they're not too bad. Depends who's playing or who comes back, but the way they are at the moment, they're not.
Yeah,
So again, get a few more goals, make it a low-scoring game. That's where Sydney's going to win. But if the Giants, I've been doing like stupid predictions of the round, and like this is going to be like even more because this is more of an either or. If the Giants get more than 48 entries, I'm going to say they win by 20. If they get less, I think if they get less than 45, I think Sydney's going to win.
yeah.
And Sydney win the inside 50 count. I don't know. Make of that what you will. I forgot what my last stupid prediction,
I've also forgotten.
arbitrary prediction was. I'm going to say I'm 2 for 0, though. So call me out in chat if I was completely wrong, which I probably was because I don't remember it. when I'm right, I tend to remember things fairly well. So there's a fair chance that I've let something selectively out of my memory banks. But
There's a
yeah,
possible
that's where I
chance
see
that.
this game going.
Yeah, I am
Yeah.
definitely leaning towards the Giants in this regard. Mostly just because of how we've seen Sydney's output past couple of weeks hasn't been clean, hasn't really been decent from them. Like
And
they've
really
had
bad at the MCG this year.
that
Oh,
too.
sorry, SCG.
That too. Like they've had some like decent moments. Like again, that first half against the
Mm.
Suns, not too bad. But it's just finding that consistency again. The fact that they have so many holes now isn't favoring them at the slightest, and the fact that they have to move around so many pieces, it's not great. Whereas the Giants, they have majority of their pieces back. The fact that Jake Riccardi had a fairly solid game for the most part
Mm.
against the Dogs, that's good signs. The fact that they're able to get like, even if they don't have Stringer in, or if Hogan isn't firing all the time, they still
Mm.
have some decent players that can step up when needed. So I think, provided the Giants midfield is able to get the ball inside 50, I think the Giants will win this pretty fair and square.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where if one of Stringer and Darcy Jones fires, it's going to be hard for Sydney because, again, Sydney just don't have the small defensive matchups at the moment.
Mm.
All their small defenders are either distributors or more awkward-ish, prefer tall things. Like Melican's not that tall. Blakey's, he's relatively tall, but he'll, you know what I mean.
Yeah,
Like he could defend small, but it's a bit of a waste. So, and against the Giants, where you need to match up a few taller players on taller players, yeah, as I said, it'll leave a few chances with Sydney's. Wait, no, I'm going the other way around.
you are going the other way
Sorry,
around.
it'll leave a few chances with Giants, small players to do some damage.
Yeah, definitely. All right, jumping over to the MCG for Hawthorn versus Richmond. And I have some thoughts on this because I was just thinking about Hawthorn's outs at this point in time. And while still their back six is still fairly solid, like they're not missing too much there. But Carl Amon being out
Maybe
now,
Scrimshaw.
Scrimshaw being out now, Kel Shadir still unsure if he's going to be out, if he's going to come back in this week. I think he's 50-50 at the moment. They might just send him to the resis. So they're still down a tall in that case. They don't have Day in that midfield. Granted, they got Warple back. He came back a couple of weeks ago and is looking pretty solid. Ginnivan hasn't been as effective as he has been the past couple of weeks. Same with Nick Watson. Mabior Chol isn't, the number one forward you want him to be. I'm going to be honest with you. We get Bolter back this week, as it's not a 10 p.m. finishing game.
Yeah.
So we have a tall defender again. So he'll probably match up on Scholl, either that or Miller will, because there are two tall defenders. So that'll and I'm not too fussed about the rest of the forward, like I said, maybe Gunston. Gunston, being very sneaky, very opportunistic past couple of weeks. So I think the forward line to backline matchup, in that regard, I think could be a Richmond favour. Hawthorn's defense to our forward line, I think will be the opposite. I think Hawthorn's defense, well, it matches up really well against us because we don't have much of a forward line at the moment still. Granted, Tom Lynch, he can only do so much really. And I appreciate that our smaller forwards having fairly solid impact, but I think Seth Campbell is underperforming right now. Luke Traynor not being in didn't really help us all that much either, being another tall option. So I think Hawthorn get the better of us in that regard. So both defenses win out in that point. So it's going to be the midfield matchup. And depending on where Sam Lawler plays, will be dependent on what the outcome may be. So if Lawler plays more forward, I think Hawthorn win far and away on that midfield. Whereas I think if he plays in the guts, who have a lot more tackling and a lot more pressure in that midfield, it could still even out, and it could be a very 50-50 game. I know the odds very much in Hawthorn's favour, as they should be. Hawthorn are by far a much better team, but I think Hawthorn's outs make this a little bit more interesting.
I want to believe that's the case.
Would I tip Richmond?
No.
I would still probably tip Hawthorn very safely, but I think we have a sniff.
Yeah, I think the thing for Hawthorn is just their strength is again, getting that outside game from their inside game going, you know what I mean? Fast handballs out and very much like that. And it's again, it's you can restrict it, but it's very hard to, and I just don't think Richmond have the bodies to do it.
Yeah, I
And we've seen
generally
Richmond
think
get exposed from outside chains.
the
So
matchup between D'Ambrosio and Hugo Ralphsmith is going to be really entertaining to watch. Just watching them both run along the wings is going to be really, really fun.
yeah, but I don't necessarily mean it's like the wings in general. You know what I mean?
Oh,
It's
yeah,
like,
I know what you mean.
that's like inside to outside. I meant like in the clearances, you win it in the guts to get it
To get it to your runner.
maybe a winger, maybe a half forward.
Yeah. I know what you mean.
Just the not blaze forward kick. So you know what I mean. So like, I think that's where Richmond could again be chasing shadows. I think that's like the avenue to the blowout, but I think the rest of what you're saying's fair-ish. Again, I've got no doubt that I will spend 0.0 seconds thinking about whether to pick the Hawthorn Hawks button over Richmond.
No, I agree with that.
Yeah.
I'm definitely,
I don't think you're
definitely comfortably
that
tipping Hawthorn
crazy
here,
for saying
but
what you're saying.
I'm not going to say no to getting another tip wrong if it means a Richmond win.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Look, I hope it's close.
Yeah,
I can imagine bits.
I genuinely think it's going to be primarily a midfield battle. Like Lloyd Meek versus Nankervis, especially after the game Meek just had, that's going to be so entertaining.
That should be a treat. Yeah.
And then jumping over to probably match of the round. Let's be real, the Q Clash. Both teams coming into this 5-1 because actually technically Brisbane 6-1 because they played their round 0 game, whereas the Suns haven't.
Yeah.
Suns probably would have beaten Essendon round 0. Let's just make this clear.
You never know.
But the fact that they're saving this for a Sunday night game, being game of the round, that's crazy that the Q Clash is on this late. But it's going to be an absolute banger.
Yeah, 5:20 at West Australian time. It's very rare to see a Sunday game start that late. I think the last one was what was it? It was like an Easter Sunday game, I think.
No, I think it was Gather Round. I think it was the Hawthorn Port game.
Oh yeah, it was. I remember coming back. No, you have Sunday dinner, but I was feeling a bit out of it, so I just watched that game. I didn't need that nervous energy. So I'm glad that they gave me a very good win. But yeah, as I said, honestly, I know I like to use the word litmus test a lot, but midfield versus midfield, this is a Suns proving ground because in a Q Clash, things tend to be a bit closer than you think. Especially up in Brisbane, where conditions can make it a bit more. You just need energy more than you need 100% cleanliness. So that can actually mean that, despite me, again, if I was just to pick a team on paper, I'd actually still pick Brisbane's midfield.
Midfield wise, I definitely lean to Brisbane in this case.
Well, you know what I mean. It's like maybe if you pick the half forwards, even like that's going to be interesting. Like, would you take like Bailey Humphrey over someone like a Cal Archie or a Carl Lohman? It's like a pretty
Lohman being out definitely doesn't help them in that case. But like if I was to pick Bailey Humphrey over Charlie Cameron, maybe I probably would.
Because Charlie Cameron, but he plays deeper.
Yeah, but the fact that he hasn't really been performing so far this year, I would.
Yeah, but you're comparing him to Jake Rogers, who's been okay.
Yeah, that's true.
So. Anyway, but you know what I mean? It's like, I don't want to say it's completely because, like, I think the interesting thing is, like, you go midfield, like, I still put it to Brisbane, but it's, like, not that far a contest. You look at the forward line, Brisbane's been a bit stop-start this year. Gold Coast, especially from back half, absolutely beautiful. Like, you'll give them a slight edge on that. And then defense, it's pretty hard to split the two because they got two different what would I say, like two different strengths, like Gold Coast, again, defending in the air and creating rebound. Really big tick. Brisbane, preventing an average inside 50 from turning into a shot when they're on fire. Big tick for them. So, yeah, as I said, on paper, there's not too much between them. And I think, really, it's just the maturity of Brisbane Like, I said, the Suns have been good, and like they're gonna get hyped through the roof if they win it, and I think they're capable. But at the end of the day, when you got two up and coming teams, one's a bit more mature than the other, it's hard not to go to them, especially when it's as I said, in their own state, Brisbane's own ground. Don't think there's that much big difference between the Gabba and Carrara, but you know what I mean. It's like it's just got to give it to the team with more experience coming off a premiership.
Yeah, I agree. And the fact that, the Lions, both of I still find it really funny that both of these teams lost at the exact same time and then won their games
Yeah.
after just to get that momentum back up and get fully refreshed. That's yeah, I think this is why that's why it's game of the round. Not to mention the fact, they're second and third. And both in red hot form, again, 6-1, 5-1 coming into this game.
Yeah,
It's
and I think the thing too is like
so
last
close.
year, Brisbane gave them a spanking, and like that first win, they sort of got embarrassed because Brisbane lost a few players, but the Suns just couldn't do anything against them, and they look fairly weak. You would say that their overall constitution was very low, but this is something that's like saying, and it's good that it's a team that will restrict some of their areas, and it's like they had a bit against Sydney, they had a bit against other teams, but arguably teams that haven't been going well at the moment. Adelaide, tiny bit different because they're not as defensively restrictive, but a team like Brisbane, like how will they go under a really big pressure test? And you really just want to see, even if Brisbane win, not by much, like I really want the Gold Coast to compete this match.
Yeah, genuinely, I think regardless of which team like you're supporting in this matchup, I think they just want the 4 points because they know this is going to be a huge game. They know this is going to be a hard game, and it's like at the end of the day, there's probably going to be a lot to learn from both of these teams. But they just want the 4 points, regardless of whether it's a 1 point game or it's a 50-point game.
I think Brisbane's more able to take the loss. You know what I mean? Like, I think they've just got more opportunity to recover. Like, as I said, as much as I'm confident in the Suns that they have improved, I still feel in the back of my mind like they could spiral. And again, that's paranoia. That's from like past history, not so much what they've shown this year.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? Like, they've got to prove themselves more than Brisbane have to. Which is why I think for them, it's actually a lot more for them on the line. And you really want to see the response, even if they don't win.
Yeah, I agree.
Just to prove that they're out to compete and compete at the highest level they can this year.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. So I think, yeah, definitely swinging towards the Lions, but genuinely could go either way.
You just want to see how this contest unfolds, even if I do think older heads prevail.
This is a match that I'm definitely going to make sure I watch because I want to see this entire outcome. 100%. But yeah, that does it for this week. Thank you all so much for coming to hang out, coming to chat, coming to chill, coming to listen, come to watch on both YouTube and Spotify, episode 56. We're looking forward to this week. As we mentioned, like there's a ton of great games on this weekend. I'm not super busy, I don't think, so I'm hoping I might get a chance to actually go to Hawthorn Richmond. But let's wait and see. We'll find out. Otherwise, stay tuned for episode 57 next week. Update on that one. I haven't actually conferred Basaric on this one, but I'm going to change the release schedule finally for the episodes. So from episode 57 onwards, they will release at 1 p.m. AEST, so which means 11 a.m. Perth time, 12:30 Adelaide time, and 3 p.m. if you're in New Zealand, if you're curious. So I think it's a much better release schedule. I kind of done the math in my head, and I think it just fits a little bit better. That way it's not super early for our West Australian friends. And it's a little bit more, I guess, of an easier afternoon listening option.
Exactly.
Out in the East. So stay tuned for that for next week. This episode, obviously, if you're seeing it at 10 a.m., this will release at 10 a.m. as per normal. But 57 onwards will be the new release schedule. Still on Wednesdays. That's not changing. Just the time. But yes, if you're curious about any other updates and things like that, they will be on the socials. I will make sure that's all there, both on mine and on the podcast socials, of course. So be sure to go and check those out. I'm still doing a bunch of streaming and some other stuff. I might during my streams this week, I might leak some of the some of the projects that I'm involved in and working on. So keep your nose to the ground on that one. Keep your ear to the ground. I don't know how the saying goes. It's one of the two. But until
Nose to
then,
the grindstone, ear to the ground.
something
That's what
like
you're
that.
mixing up.
That's probably what I am, but that's okay. It happens. I apologize for the 3 hour long episode. We had a lot to talk about, but I think it was very solid this week, and I hope you all enjoy. So until then, we'll love you all and live you all, and see you all next week. Catch us later.